It was a cold, snowy day in the hidden shinobi village, Konohagakure no Sato, the village hidden by tree leaves. Most of the inhabitants felt it would be better to stay indoors, curled up under their blankets and sipping hot drinks, than to venture outside for any unnecessary reasons. Uzumaki Naruto was not among them. He never had been, and if the villagers continued to have their way, he never would be. Naruto was shorter than average for his 8 years of age, the result of poor dietary habits enforced by the tendency of most shopkeepers and merchants to throw him out of their stores or market stalls. He wasn't quite properly dressed for the winter weather, which wasn't all that surprising given that snow was something of a rarity for most locations in Hai no Kuni, the land of fire. He donned blue short pants and black shoes, a cream-colored jacket with brown sleeves worn over a green t-shirt with a white version of the Uzumaki crest printed on the front, a lengthy red scarf around his neck, and green goggles over his forehead that he wore to protect his blue eyes whenever he was getting back at one of the aforementioned shopkeepers, merchants with one of his pranks. Those blue eyes, along with his spiky blonde hair, were traits that were rarely seen in Konoha outside of the Yamanaka clan, and they already gave Naruto somewhat of a distinctive look, but it was the birthmarks he bore, 3 whisker marks on each cheek, that really stood out. Unless it was to sleep, Naruto had no reason to stay at home, no matter the weather. Because no one was there for him. He was an orphan, but unlike other orphans he had not spent his first years in the village's orphanage, instead being raised by various elders, and the only thing he knew about his parents was that they had died shortly after he was born. Even the system the third Hokage had set up had eventually fallen apart last October. Naruto was deemed old enough to take care of himself, and with other recent losses suffered by the village, they could not afford to spare any personnel to care for him any longer. That October, for his 8th birthday, Naruto had been set up with a small attic-like apartment and a monthly pension that would allow him to purchase his own food, clothing and other necessities. The apartment itself was not a bad place to live. It was just that it was so empty and lonely all the time, so Naruto went out of his way to avoid staying there whenever he could get out. Currently, he was seated on the swing just outside the Konoha Ninja Academy, where he would be officially enrolled starting in the spring. The third Hokage was one of only 3 people who had ever shown Naruto any real kindness, and that made him the closest thing to a friend Naruto had, but since his duties to the rest of the village made it difficult for him to visit Naruto more than once each month, Naruto could not be sure that the Hokage was actually a friend. But Naruto had learned quickly that the position of Hokage was one that commanded the admiration of the rest of the villagers and instilled inspiration in them. He saw how everyone else who interacted with the Hokage would only show him the utmost respect, a respect that even Naruto's caretakers had denied him. Even at such a young age, Naruto knew that the only reason his previous caretakers had taken him in was because the Hokage had ordered them to, not out of any genuine act of compassion. He was an outcast, after all, even if he didn't understand why. But seeing the old man hold such influence over the rest of the village made Naruto determined to gain that influence himself. Naruto reasoned that if he were to become Hokage, everyone else would have to stop treating him like he doesn't exist. They would have to start treating him like he was important, like he was someone who mattered. But the Hokage was also supposed to be the strongest shinobi in the village, which meant that they had to be really good at using a lot of powerful jutsu. So far, Naruto only knew how he was supposed to perform one jutsu, the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, and that was only because he had caught an accidental glimpse of an Anbu using that jutsu a while back. And for all the effort he had put into trying to master the jutsu, he was still a long ways away from getting it to work. "I'm gonna have to get that jutsu down soon if I want to make it through school," Naruto lamented with a deep sigh. He would have continued brooding on the swing, were it not for his noticing a trio of boys stop right at the gate. He focused on them and saw that they were circling around a little girl. This girl also had unusual hair, only hers was dark blue and styled in a Heimcut, with 2 bangs that framed her cheeks. Her pale skin, even from this distance, looked perfectly smooth, and the exposure to the winter air caused a tiny blush to adorn her cheeks, something Naruto thought looked very cute. Then Naruto noticed her eyes, and they were the strangest thing he had ever seen. He couldn't get that great of a view while the other boys were in front of her, but from what he could tell, her eyes had no pupils and were tinted lavender, making them look almost like crystals. He didn't know what to make of this until he heard one of the 3 boys speak up. If you're a Hyuga, then show us your Byakugan. What's a Byakugan? Naruto thought. I bet you're really a monster. Another boy accused. Yeah, a Byakugan monster. The third added with a laugh. This proved too much for the girl and she burst into tears. Naruto had also heard enough and jumped off the swing to confront the bullies. Hey, leave her alone, he shouted. The three bullies spun around and gave him a nasty smirk. And who are you supposed to be? The first bully demanded. Trying to play knight in shining armor for this creep? The second bully added, further angering Naruto as he saw the girl had fallen to her knees, trying to hide her tears. Naruto scrambled to come up with a grand introduction, one that would be sure to command their respect and make them stop bullying the poor girl. It became doubly important when he noticed her lift her head up, gazing upon her would-be savior. What he said now would determine how he would have to live the rest of his life. The name's Uzumaki Naruto, and I'm gonna become Hokage. Naruto yelled with vigor. The way he said it made him fully convinced that it would happen, almost as though the words themselves carried some sort of latent power. The girl seemed to believe so as well. She looked at the blonde boy from behind the bully trio and felt her heart skip a beat at his words. How could this boy carry so much confidence that he could make anything he said seem possible? The bullies, however, were not swayed. They stared at Naruto for a few seconds, dumbstruck by his audacity, and then burst into laughter. You, the Hokage? One of the bullies said. Hey, I've heard about you. You're that brat my dad says is always causing trouble. What could a runt like you do to become Hokage? Another taunted. Naruto growled at the bullies as he formed the ram hand seal with his hands. I'll show you. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, he yelled, making them tremble in fear at the ninjutsu he was attempting to use. Only to be completely underwhelmed when the two puffs of smoke created by the jutsu attempt cleared to reveal a pair of miniature clones. Come at me, one of the mini Naruto clones yelled, but due to its tiny size it sounded more like a squeak. You know, the other chibi clone yelled, squeaked. The bullies lost it and burst into even harder laughter than before. And I thought he might actually do something, one of them mocked. Let's teach this bastard a lesson for messing with us. Another shouted, promptly connecting his fist with the face of a Naruto who was too stunned by the failure of his jutsu to be able to react to his attack. The punch instantly caused swelling around his right eye and bloodied his nose, and caused him to fall backwards into the snow, sending the bullies into their biggest laughing fit yet. Future Hokage, my ass. The tallest one shouted. It didn't take long for his peers to come up with more ideas to laugh at Naruto's expense. Let's mess up this nice scarf of his while we're at it. Yeah, he must think he is so great wearing something like this. All the while, the girl Naruto had tried to defend could do nothing but watch as the trio unwrapped the red scarf from around his neck and began to tear it apart. First they formed a triangle and stretched it as far as they could on their own. Then they hung it from the branch of a nearby tree and swung around. And finally they threw it back into the snow and stomped on it until they grew bored. Ah, it's no fun if he isn't awake for it. Let's go, the bully who had punched Naruto earlier said right as Naruto was starting to recover. Yeah, let's leave the two losers alone, the tall one agreed. We stick around them too long and we might get infected by their lameness. And they walked off, giving their victims and the ruined scarf one last look of disgust as they left the school grounds. Naruto blinked a couple of times and shot straight up to his feet, not noticing that the bullies were already gone. Hey, wait, I'm not done yet. This time I'll make a really strong clone and… But his voice failed him when he finally realized that the bullies were nowhere in sight, and the pain from that single punch that had been landed on him finally registered, forcing him to kneel down and moan. Ow, ow, ow. Hey, are you okay? The girl asked. That was the other thing Naruto hadn't noticed until now. The girl he was trying to save was right next to him, also kneeling down with him and still sniffling a little as she held the remains of his scarf in her arms. Naruto still hurt as he carefully turned his head to look at her. Yeah, it's okay, I'm used to it, he said, rubbing the side of his face the bully didn't hit. He was about to stand back up, but he found that he couldn't take his eyes off hers, and it wasn't because he thought they were weird. It was something else, a feeling so alien that he had no hope of figuring out what it was. Those three boys, they ruined your scarf because you helped me, the girl lamented, beating herself up over how her own weakness had caused this really nice kid to suffer. I'm really sorry. Naruto sighed and waved off her apology. "Nah, forget it," he said, pushing down on both knees with his hands to push himself back to his feet. This drew out a protest from the girl, who couldn't just do as he said and let the incident go. But they wouldn't have bothered you if you hadn't tried to stand up for me. And besides, we don't even know each other. Why would you help me? Though Naruto wouldn't know the whole story for years to come, this girl was part of one of the largest, most prestigious clans in Konoha. But she was universally despised by her clan for her failure to meet any of the standards they imposed on their members. They all scorned and ostracized her to the point that she was convinced she would remain a failure forever. It felt so much colder to her inside her clan's estate than it did being outside in the snow. The absence of warmth at home planted many troubling thoughts inside her head, and she was seriously questioning whether it was worth it to keep going on, to keep living, if that was all her existence would ever mean. So when Naruto smiled at her, the feeling of warmth she felt from him already deeply affected her. The innocence in his expression made her heart throb madly. And his answer to her desperate question would leave her changed forever. "Do I need a reason to help someone?" The girl felt a fresh wave of tears escape from her eyes, and she quickly turned away to wipe them off so he wouldn't see her crying. But in those few seconds it took her to recompose herself, Naruto was already running off. She couldn't let him leave, not without telling him just how much his kindness towards her today meant to her. Wait, the girl said quietly, reaching out and grabbing one of Naruto's hands before he could leave. "Huh? What's the matter?" The girl let go of his hand and blushed slightly as she forced herself to speak up. "Hinata, my name is Hyuga Hinata, and I just wanted to tell you how grateful I am for what you did for me today." "Thank you very much," she said, bowing deeply as a further gesture of her gratitude. Naruto was frozen in place for a few seconds, and it had nothing to do with the weather. His mind was in a frenzy as he tried to process her words. Again, with the exception of the third Hokage and the two people who ran the Ichiraku ramen bar, no one had ever shown him any true kindness. And yet this girl had just thanked him, even though he hadn't done anything that was worth thanking him for. He didn't understand it, and yet he couldn't help the happiness that was about to burst out from his heart. "Hinata?" Naruto whispered in awe. "That's a pretty name, you know." And then he grinned madly, expressing his happiness in the only way he knew how. "I'll see ya around, Hinata," he shouted, a final conveyance of the happiness her words to him gave him before he turned back around and made his exit, wanting to let the other three important people in his life share in that happiness. The girl whose name was Hinata held the torn scarf close to her chest and smiled softly as she watched her blonde savior run into the distance. She had no way of knowing that one day in the not-so-distant future, she would save him the way he had just saved her. "Uzumaki Naruto-kun," Hinata whispered to herself, dangerously close to entering a trance. 3 years and 10 months later. Regrettably, the happiness Naruto had felt from Hinata's gratitude was overwhelmed by his extreme mortification over what he viewed as an immense failure, causing his mind to repress the memory of saving Hinata from the three bullies. It also did not help his attempts to retain that memory when contact between the two since that winter morning was very limited, despite her being placed in the same class as him at the Ninja Academy. Sometimes, Naruto thought there was supposed to be something there, something that was missing, but it was a thought he never dwelt on. There was always a more pressing matter which required his attention. Today was no exception. Today was the day he would be assigned to a platoon and finally be recognized as a Konoha ninja. It was his next major step on his road to becoming Hokage. In his excitement, Naruto rushed through his morning routine and even skipped breakfast because he was so anxious to arrive on time and find out the team to which he was assigned. And after an incident involving every single one of a certain moody classmate's fangirls, he was eagerly awaiting his teacher's announcement of the team placements. "First off, I want to congratulate all of you for graduating. You have all worked hard these past few years to make it this far, but I must warn you that your lives will only become more difficult from here on out." The teacher, a chunin named Amino Iruka who was only 10 years older than his students, announced to the class. In almost every aspect, Iruka was the definition of an average shinobi. Nothing stood out about his physical appearance aside from the scar that stretched across the middle of his face, and his skill level as a ninja was nothing to write home about, unless you factored in his experience in chasing down and disciplining Naruto after the mischievous blonde was caught in the middle of one of his many pranks. Those pranks, however, had helped create a bond between Iruka and Naruto that went beyond teacher and student. Come on, Iruka-sensei. Just tell us the teams already. Naruto whined. I will get to it, Naruto. Be patient, Iruka instructed. You're being more annoying than usual today, Yusura Tonkachi, one of Naruto's classmates muttered. Naruto's head quickly snapped to the side to face the origin of that voice. The aforementioned moody one with all the violent fangirls, Uchiha Sasuke. Sasuke was taller than Naruto, though that didn't say much, since Naruto was the shortest student in his class, with blue-tinted, jet-black hair that was spiky in the back and had bangs hanging over his face. He kept his clothing simple, wearing a blue t-shirt with the symbol of the Uchiha clan emblazoned on the back, along with white shorts and arm warmers. From day one at the academy, Naruto and Sasuke had been at each other's throats. Naruto detested Sasuke for his extreme popularity among his classmates and the village in general, and for his status as a prodigy. Sasuke had everything Naruto desired, and Naruto had decided after being humiliated in their first spar that the best way to earn that all for himself was to defeat Sasuke decisively and prove his superiority. But even the few times Naruto had beaten Sasuke over the course of their bitter rivalry had failed to garner him any positive attention. And the worst part of it all? Sasuke didn't like the attention he received. He even went out of his way to belittle the girls who fawned over him. That pissed Naruto off like nothing else. Tame, no one asked for your opinion. Naruto shouted at Sasuke. Don't talk to Sasuke-kun like that. Naruto Baka, one of Sasuke's fangirls, the pink-haired Haruno Sakura, screeched into Naruto's ears, making Naruto cover them in response. Sakura was yet another reason Naruto couldn't stand the so-called last loyal Uchiha. Physically, Sakura was the only one of Sasuke's fangirls Naruto had found attractive. Her pink hair was an exotic trait, accentuated by her fair skin and emerald eyes, and Naruto thought she had the best fashion sense out of all of Sasuke's fangirls with her favored red kippah dress. But the real reason he had a massive crush on the girl was because he had found himself empathizing with her desire to be acknowledged by Sasuke. But it still made Naruto angry when Sakura fawned over Sasuke or jumped to his defense. He never acted on that anger because when he and Sakura were left unsupervised, Sakura would occasionally use physical violence against him. And Naruto lived in fear of the next time he would meet with a hard fist to his head from her. But not this time. Sakura and Sasuke were ruining Naruto's good mood and he wasn't about to let them continue. Just get over him already, Sakura. What the hell is so great about that jerk, anyway? Naruto shouted at Sakura after his ears recovered from her verbal abuse. I couldn't even begin to list everything that makes Sasuke-kun better than you'll ever be. Sakura sneered at Naruto. Baka, she couldn't resist adding the habitual insult. Alright, that's enough. Iruka snapped at the class. Quiet down or you'll all stay here for another year. The room instantly went silent as most of the students cowed in fear of the threat from their teacher. Iruka shook his head at them and sighed deeply before going on. You really need to work on getting that bickering under control. When you are assigned to your teams, your Jonin instructors will not tolerate any lapses in your teamwork. What's that supposed to mean, Iruka-sensei? Another of Sasuke's fangirls, the blonde Yamanaka Ino, asked. Ino also had a short temper and a massive crush on the last loyal Uchiha, but unlike Sakura, was more provocative with her clothing choice, relying on a sarashi to cover the large amounts of skin that would otherwise be exposed by her purple vest-like blouse and apron skirt. Naruto honestly thought she was the most annoying girl in the class. It means that should your Jonin instructors choose to do so, they can still fail you and prevent you from becoming a genin, Iruka explained. This caused almost the entire class to scream in protest, complaining about how it wasn't fair that after how hard they'd worked to pass, it could still amount to nothing. Quiet down, he shouted again, his head comically growing to several times its normal size to make his students cower. It is completely fair for them to make that choice if they are so inclined. Teamwork is emphasized in your shinobi training for a reason, students. How can you expect to complete a mission you're assigned to if you can't rely on your teammates? He waited for almost 15 seconds to see if any of his students would issue another complaint, but they all remained silent. He gave them a nod, appearing satisfied that his message had sunk in. Good. Now then, I expect that you will accept your team assignments without any further complaints and that you will obey the orders of your new instructors without question, he finished, glancing at the clipboard that he had kept in his hand since his arrival. Team 1. As Iruka began listing off the teams, Naruto let his mind wander off, tuning out Iruka's voice as he contemplated the meaning of what his teacher had just said. After all that, there's still a chance I might not become a ninja? Naruto wondered. Nah, that can't be right. I'll be fine. I've trained way too hard to fail now. There's no way I won't pass any tests they might throw at me now. His thoughts were interrupted when he heard some of the other girls in the class, whose names he didn't care to remember, express their displeasure with the teams to which they were assigned, but Naruto wasn't bothered in the slightest, because none of those teams were his. As long as Sasuke-me isn't on my team, I'll be fine. I really hope I get Sakura-chan, though. He was pulled out of his thoughts altogether when Iruka began to read off the second half of the teams, not noticing the slight grimace Iruka had when his eyes glossed over the next team on the list. Team 7 will consist of Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto heard from Iruka, making him start paying attention again. Haruno Sakura. Yes, Naruto shouted, jumping up out of his seat. I'm doomed, Sakura moaned, head sinking down onto her desk in gloom and horror over having the blonde idiot as a teammate. And Uchiha Sasuke, Iruka finished, making Sakura jump up in excitement, and with more vulgarity than Naruto had done a few seconds earlier. While Naruto momentarily fell into the gloom Sakura had felt when her name was announced. But unlike Sakura, Naruto's depression turned into anger. Iruka-sensei, Naruto shouted, standing up and slamming his right hand on his desk while pointing his left hand at Sasuke. Why does an outstanding shinobi like me have to be on the same team as that prick over there? To his credit, Iruka held himself back from sighing. The way the teams are formed takes into account the individual strengths and weaknesses each member has shown during their classes here at the academy. Each team is designed to be balanced. And the reason you and Sasuke are on the same team is because Sasuke had the highest grades out of all 27 graduates in this class, and yours were dead last. You do understand the importance of balance, right? HMPH, Sasuke grunted, folding his hands on his desk. You'd better not get in my way, Dobi. He couldn't resist insulting Naruto. What did you just call me? Naruto shouted at Sasuke. Give it a rest, Naruto. Sakura screamed directly into Naruto's ear. Now Iruka sighed. This team is a disaster in the making, he thought as he watched the 3 students assigned to this year's team 7 lapse back into their usual misbehavior. I don't know what Hokage-sama was thinking by putting those 3 together. I just hope they can pull through somehow. Naruto decided to wait outside on the swing, watching from this distance as his classmates either hung around the premises or left. He had no desire to be around either of his teammates at the moment, not after learning the disappointing news that he was stuck with Sasuke on his team. He would have been fine with anyone else but Sasuke, and having Sakura on the team without Sasuke would have been a bonus, but with both Sasuke and Sakura together, he had serious doubts about his future as a shinobi of Konoha. Damn you, Sasuke-me. Damn you, Sakura. And damn you too, Iruka-sensei. You know how much I hate Sasuke-me and you still did this. Naruto cursed his teammates and teacher in his mind. He wondered if Iruka had done this as payback for all the pranks he had pulled up until now, and as that thought lingered, he imagined Iruka retreating to somewhere private and laughing at his misery and quickly decided he couldn't let his teacher off the hook for making him team up with someone he couldn't stand being around. I'll get you back for this, Iruka-sensei. I'll make you buy me ramen at Ichiraku every day for a whole month. You excuse me Naruto-kun. A soft voice pulled him out of his thoughts. Naruto then felt a small hand just barely touch his hand that was gripping the chains of the swing and, startled by this, jumped out of the swing to face the voice's owner. Hey, don't scare me like that, you know. Naruto shouted. I am sorry, Hinata stammered, taking a few involuntary steps backward. Nah, it's alright. Naruto scratched the back of his head as he tried to remember who this girl was. But, what was your name again? He asked. He knew he should have remembered this girl. All of her facial features, dark blue hair, small round face, and lavender eyes, reminded him of someone he had met long ago, but for some reason, he couldn't make the connection. I see, Hinata said, her face showing the same expression of disappointment it had earlier when she and Naruto were assigned to different teams. So Naruto-kun doesn't remember me. Naruto laughed nervously. Yeah, sorry. I mean, I see you around class but every time I tried to talk with you, you seemed like you were too busy. Hinata shook her head. Please don't apologize, Naruto-kun. I didn't make it any easier on you. You see, ever since that day we first met, I have always been nervous about talking to you. Oh really? Why is that? Naruto asked. He was genuinely curious about how this girl knew him and he knew that he recognized her from somewhere, but he still, for the life of him, could not figure out where. Hinata's head lowered and she started poking her index fingers together as her shyness worked against her. It was, huh? Naruto said, but the girl seemed unresponsive. You gotta speak up, you know, he said, waving his hand in front of her. This startled her and she jumped back a couple of steps, then took a few deep breaths to calm her nerves before doing as Naruto asked. It was almost 4 years ago, and it was the only time we have ever talked until now, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised that you don't remember me, Hinata answered. We hadn't started attending the academy yet. It was snowing, and the red scarf you wore was ruined when you stood up for me against a trio of bullies. Naruto squinted his eyes and moved closer to the girl, holding his right hand above her head as he examined her, trying to recall the event she told him about. After about a minute, he was about to let his mouth run off with the first thing that came to mind when his eyes opened and focused directly into hers. It was those eyes, those strange lavender crystals, that made her so familiar to him. Naruto remembered the strangeness of those eyes from back then and now he found himself getting lost in them. And that was when his brain finally put the pieces together. Hinata. Naruto was having difficulty holding back his excitement from recognizing her. It's you, it's really you, he shouted, placing his hand on top of her head and ruffling her hair a little. Hinata, for her part, also had some difficulties with holding back her own feelings. As it was, her eyes were sparkling when Naruto remembered their meeting on that day, and she blushed when she felt Naruto touch her hair. Yes, that's right. I'm so glad you remembered, Naruto-kun. Hee, Naruto chuckled awkwardly and gave Hinata a wide grin. A few seconds later, his grin vanished and he was back to drifting in thought. But that's so weird, you know. I should have remembered something like that right away. He turned away slightly before adding, wonder why I forgot. Please do not blame yourself, Hinata said. The important thing is that you did remember me, even if it took you time to remember. Well, either way, I'm sorry. I tried to remember, but after what happened with those jerks, I didn't get to see you much. As I said just now, please don't blame yourself for that, Naruto-kun. If anything, it's my fault. Partly because I was so nervous about seeing you again. Oh yeah, you mentioned that earlier, but why were you nervous? Hinata couldn't answer that question. There were a lot of reasons why she was nervous, and she felt like it would take her several days if she tried to list them all. The most important reason, of course, was the problems she faced within her own home, from her own clan. But she couldn't bring herself to tell Naruto about the pain she suffered in her home, either. Besides, this wasn't about her, it was about him. The reason she had approached Naruto was to try to lift his spirits. It's not important, she lied. But, actually, Naruto-kun, I wanted to congratulate you, she interrupted. Naruto went back to being confused. Congratulate me for what, Hinata? Well, for passing, of course. I was so worried when we took that test this last weekend that you were going to be held back another year. But when you finally succeeded in using that jutsu, the one you tried to use for me the day we first met, and received your Hite 8 from Iruka-sensei, I was so happy for you. You deserve to be congratulated for your efforts, Naruto-kun. Naruto blushed slightly from her praise as he grinned. Yeah, well, it was obvious I was gonna pass from the start, he boasted. After all, I'm gonna be Hokage someday, believe it. Hinata giggled at his bragging, making his heart skip a beat at how pure and innocent her voice sounded. I do believe it, Naruto-kun, she replied, catching Naruto completely by surprise. No way, did she just? Naruto stuck a finger in his ear, telling Hinata that he couldn't believe what she'd just said. There was just no way he could have heard her right. He was so used to people dismissing his dream or only pretending to agree with him just to make fun of him that to hear someone claim that they believed him, and mean it, no, it just wasn't possible. Hey, are you trying to make fun of me, Hinata? Naruto asked, eyes narrowing at her. Hinata gasped at his response. Her eyes, which had been so vibrant, were starting to dull from the hurt she felt from Naruto's accusation. Why would I make fun of you, Naruto-kun? She stammered out her reply. Unfortunately for them both, she did not get a chance to clear up this misunderstanding. "Hinata-sama," a voice, unfamiliar to Naruto but painful to Hinata, called out. Both of them turned to their side to face a man with similar, yet completely different eyes from Hinata approach them, and even before he finished walking up to them, Naruto decided that he did not like this person at all. "Ko-san," Hinata addressed him. "Isn't it too early for you to be here? Clearly, I didn't arrive soon enough." The now identified Ko did not make any effort to hide his contempt for his charge's crush as he replied. "Hinata-sama, you were warned by the elders to stay away from that child. Once I inform them of your disobedience, you will be punished severely." Every single word he spoke fueled a burning rage inside Naruto even as Hinata wilted from their sting. It was just like that time with the bullies, only now it was one bigger bully instead of three. Naruto didn't care who this person was. He wasn't about to let him get away with this. "Don't call me that child. I have a name, you know," Naruto screamed at Ko. "And don't you dare hurt Hinata. She didn't do anything wrong." Ko acted decisively to shut down Naruto. He turned to face the blonde and activated his Byakugan, freezing Naruto in place with his fierce glare and murderous aura. The Jinchuriki still needs to learn his place in this village, he thought with no small amount of disdain. He did not know nor care how much pain his actions here would bring upon Naruto. "Uzumaki," Ko intensified his glare as he addressed Naruto. "If you know what's good for you, you'll stay away from Hinata-sama." Naruto tried to move, tried to do something, but this was even worse than the incident with the bully trio. The bully wasn't attacking him, but at the same time, he didn't have to attack. He was drowning in the bully's aura, his body refusing to obey his commands to move and use that jutsu so he could stop him and save Hinata. All he could do was watch as the bully grabbed Hinata's wrist and forced her to start walking away. And all Hinata could do was give Naruto an anguished look as she was taken away from him. By the time Naruto recovered, it was too late. Hinata and that Ko-person were long gone. He had lost his first real friend again and he hadn't been able to do anything to stop it. And unbeknownst to him or any of the other few people who cared enough to do something about it, his life was only about to get even worse. Naruto sank into a deeper depression than ever as he sat back down on the swing, watching as the rest of the students left. For the second time in his life, he had let himself get lured by the false hope of finally making a real friend, and his mistake reminded him of his eternal loneliness. What made it worse was that somewhere in his heart, he felt like Hinata wasn't pretending to be kind just to hurt him. But someone else had still objected to their friendship. Someone who had the power to make sure she couldn't be his friend. "I can't let this get me down though," Naruto thought, trying to shake himself out of his depression. "Once I get some ramen in my stomach, I'll feel much better. Then I can figure out what I'm gonna do about this." Satisfied with this, he hopped off the swing and started walking towards Ramen Ichiraku to order himself several bowls of the divine, heartwarming meal. Only to stop and take several steps backward when he saw Sakura sitting by herself on a stone bench to the right of the academy's front gate. And from his perspective, Sakura appeared to be waiting for someone. It wasn't difficult to guess who. She probably thinks Sasuke will come along any moment now. Naruto knew better than to delude himself like Sakura was evidently doing to herself. If Sasuke had told Sakura to wait on him, his intent would have been to make sure he rid himself of Sakura once and for all. That thought gave Naruto an idea. Realizing that Sakura had not noticed him starting to walk out of the gates, he took several more steps backward, hiding behind a tree for extra cover, then made the hand seals required to perform one of the 3 ninjutsu he was taught how to use at the academy, the Henge no Jutsu. A few seconds later, Naruto was enveloped in a cloud of smoke, which quickly faded to reveal a perfect physical copy of Sasuke. Hee, this is my chance to win Sakura-chan over for good, he thought to himself, feeling triumphant as he casually approached the object of his affections, who was now paying full attention to him and smiling widely. "Sasuke-kun," Sakura greeted in her usual manner. "You don't need to yell all the time, Sakura," Naruto as Sasuke softly chastised her. Inwardly, he breathed a sigh of relief that he hadn't slipped up and attached the affectionate suffix which the real Sasuke never used. Sakura blushed as she shyly replied, "Oh, well, it's just that I didn't think you would actually come, so I kinda got excited." "Why would you think I wasn't coming?" Naruto's question caused Sakura to respond by looking away to hide her embarrassment, which he found to be cute. Ever since that day, you've always been so distant. I still remember what you were like before then, back when we first enrolled at the academy. You were different back then. You were friendly. And to be honest, I was surprised when you asked me to wait for you out here. It didn't seem like you. But it also gave me hope. Hope that I might be able to help you. Those were some of the few days that Naruto remembered well. Shortly after the Uchiha massacre, Naruto had found Sasuke sitting by himself near a pond, but due to his pride, he had been unable to approach Sasuke. But for all the animosity between them, Naruto was perhaps the only one in their class who truly understood what Sasuke went through every day since that day. And yet Sakura had known a different side of Sasuke from before Naruto first met the jerk. And finding this out about Sakura had only increased Naruto's own determination to win her over. Like him, Sakura wanted to be acknowledged. She just hadn't figured out yet that Sasuke would never acknowledge her. Actually, Sakura, that's bothered me for a while now, Sasuke said. Why do you even like me in the first place? He didn't really care what answer she gave to that question. The asking was simply part of his plan to convince Sakura that the real Sasuke would always reject her. Well, what's not to like about you, Sasuke-kun? Sakura answered. You're basically everyone's dream boy. Always acting so cool and collected, excelling at everything you do. It'd be more surprising if people didn't admire you. It was the typical response of a fangirl, of someone who only saw Sasuke as a trophy husband. But Sakura had also reminded Naruto just a minute ago why she was different enough from all the other fangirls that she wasn't a lost cause, like they were. If she could just be broken out of her obsession with Sasuke, she would be the ideal girlfriend. And Naruto had decided this was the perfect opportunity to break Sakura of her obsession. If that's how you really feel, then you're just wasting your time, Naruto, as Sasuke said, taking care to make sure his words were something the real Sasuke would have told her. What you want to have with me, it isn't going to work out. For what seemed like an eternity, an expression of disbelief was frozen on Sakura's face as she tried to register what Sasuke had just told her. Once it sunk in that Sasuke was rejecting her to her face, her thoughts turned to a mixture of panic and outrage. What? Sakura nearly screamed. To be honest, you're not the problem, Sasuke continued, trying to make this fake rejection as painless as possible for Sakura. It's actually me. I just can't be with anyone right now. Sorry. Sakura's face dropped as her mind absorbed those words. Oh, is that how it is? She asked, and Sasuke nodded. I see. I'm sorry for being such a bother, Sasuke-kun, she added, and was about to get up off the bench and walk home when Sasuke stopped her with his next question. Why don't you give Naruto a chance? Naruto, as Sasuke asked. He may be an idiot, but he's the only boy in the class who actually likes you. I'll never understand why, though. It was supposed to be the perfect plan. Belittle Sakura just as Sasuke would do, in such a way that she would have to take the advice given to her, if only out of spite. But any seasoned shinobi would have known that no plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. In this case, the enemy was Sakura. And she was an enemy Naruto had badly underestimated. Are you kidding me? Sakura screamed, shooting up from the bench and leaving Sasuke stunned with how much offense she took to his suggestion. Who would ever want to go out on a date with him? What makes you think that, Sakura? Sasuke was now demanding more than asking. What do you really think of Naruto? Oh, please. You know perfectly well what I think of him, Sasuke-kun. As you said, Naruto's an idiot. He's always so annoying, going on and on about how he'll become Hokage someday. He's like a broken record. Does anyone even take that pointless drivel of his seriously? And don't even get me started on his diet. Every day it's always the same thing, ramen, ramen, and more ramen. He's such a picky eater, it's disgusting. Doesn't he know how unhealthy it is to eat so much ramen? Doesn't he know there's other kinds of food he should be eating instead? But no one will even let me buy anything else, Naruto wanted to tell Sakura, but as much as he needed her to understand the truth, as long as she remained fooled by his henge no jutsu into believing he was Sasuke, he had no choice but to remain silent and endure her rant. Then when he's training he always messes up, but he doesn't know when to quit. It's embarrassing and quite frankly it's pathetic. Not only that, but he goes around pulling all these pranks on people and starting fights with you, and most of the time he doesn't even get in trouble for it. Sakura lifted her arms up in exasperation and closed her eyes before continuing her rant, but in a softer voice. I guess it makes sense since he doesn't have any parents to give him a normal childhood. Actually, I'm kinda jealous of him for that. Naruto's lucky he doesn't have any parents to tell him what to do. If I tried to pull even a tenth of the stunts he tries, my parents would ground me forever. Then she grew visibly angry again and put her hands on her hips before resuming her shouting. But then again, his parents probably knew what he would turn out like, so they abandoned him on purpose. Would anyone really want to raise someone like him? But my parents are dead, so they couldn't have. Naruto felt like he was drowning in negative emotions. Sakura's rant challenged what little he thought he knew about the family he'd never had. Was she right about him? Was he really so pathetic, annoying and disgusting that no one would ever want anything to do with him? But it was Sakura's next words that would truly shatter Naruto's soul in such a way that the pieces would be nearly impossible to put back together. Honestly, I don't think anyone would miss Naruto if he disappeared. He'll never become Hokage and he'll never have any friends. Why can't he just go away? If there were any pieces of his soul left to be shattered after Sakura finished her rant, Naruto felt them all shattering like the most fragile glass. He had put so much of his efforts into winning her over, yet she truly believed, just like everyone else, that his very existence was an unforgivable sin. Sakura had laid it out for Naruto in painful detail. There was not a single redeeming quality to him. Everything about him was wrong, and nothing he could do would fix that. What did I do wrong, Sasuke-kun? Why are you crying? Naruto hadn't even noticed until Sakura pretended to start showing concern that her rant had brought him to tears. Fearing that he would be discovered now and she would tear through him to break what hadn't already been broken, he turned on his feet and ran away as fast as his legs would allow, leaving Sakura bewildered at what she had said to upset her crush. Naruto neither knew nor cared where he was running. Even if he had tried to look, his vision was too blurry from the unending wave of tears flowing from his eyes. The only thing he knew was that he had to run away, as far as humanly possible, and never look back. Everything Sakura said about him back there made sense, too much sense. All the villagers were actually right to hate him and there was nothing he could do that would convince them they were wrong. When his legs finally gave out, he fell face first into the dirt and continued bawling his eyes out. He hated himself for being such a crybaby, having learned a long time ago that no one would comfort him when he felt the need to cry, but he couldn't make the tears stop. There was just too much heartache. Once the tears slowed down enough that Naruto's vision cleared, he realized that he had been crying for so long that night had fallen over Konoha. And furthermore, when he looked down he realized that he had run all the way to the top of the Hokage rock. Naruto quickly scrambled backward. If his legs had carried him just a few meters further, he would have run right off the top of the stone carving of the fourth Hokage's head and fallen to his untimely demise. Naruto took several deep breaths to calm himself and then hopped down off the cliff and onto the fourth's head, and carefully moved closer to the edge of one of the spikes of the fourth's hair. In a way, it made sense that his natural instincts would bring him here. He had always idolized the fourth Hokage. The fourth had given his life to save Konoha during its darkest hour, the night the Kyuubi no Yoko, nine-tailed demon fox, attacked. It just so happened to be the same night Naruto was born, presumably also the night his parents were killed. That is, if they had actually been killed. So this is how a Hokage sees the world, huh? Naruto thought aloud. From this spot, the highest location in Konoha, he had a perfect view of most of the village below. From the abandoned Uchiha district on the outskirts, haunted by the murders of its residents, to the lit-up and lively market district closer to the center of the village, Naruto felt like he could see everything in the village he called home. And he couldn't help but wonder if the previous Hokage were still able to share the view Naruto had from his seat atop the monument. But I guess I'll never know for sure, he said in his depression. After all, as much as he had wanted to become Hokage, he now knew that his dream was dead. Just as he had come so close to being. Naruto's sight focused on a tiny figure at one of the market stands. He couldn't tell for sure since he was so far away, but it looked like a little kid. And just behind this kid were two other figures who Naruto could only assume were the kid's parents. Yet even from this distance, it looked like they were all enjoying themselves. Like they were all happy. Were my parents like that? Or would they have hated me too? Was I so much of a burden on them that they really just abandoned me like Sakura claimed? Naruto did not know what to believe anymore. A big part of what had kept him going was the hope that his family, had he been able to have a real family, would have given him the attention he needed so desperately. But now all of his hopes and beliefs were broken. Was he nothing more than a mistake his parents shouldn't have made? Had he really grown so arrogant in his misguided belief that someone like him could transform himself into a symbol of leadership and admiration by becoming the Hokage? All he had ever wanted was for people to stop treating him like he didn't exist. He wanted to feel like his existence mattered. He wanted them to let him help them so that he would feel like he was needed. Was that really so wrong? If he was to allow Sakura's hatred of him to decide the truth, then he already had the answer. And if that was really the case, then the only way people would ever acknowledge his existence was if he ceased to exist. This time, he knew it was the perfect plan. If Naruto just went away like Sakura wanted, she and everyone else would be much better off without him. No one would have to deal with his pranks and other nonsense anymore. No one would ever look at him with contempt. They might even go so far as to thank him for finally leaving them in peace. I guess there really wasn't much of a point in becoming Hokage anyway, Naruto thought wistfully as he stood up. I just wanted people to acknowledge me. But now I know that even if I did fulfill my dream, they'd still find a way to ignore me. As he stood at the edge, just centimeters away from falling off and bringing his short and miserable life to an end, a memory flashed before his eyes. For that brief moment, he was back at the academy, receiving an assignment from Iruka. If the world were going to come to an end tomorrow, who would you like to spend your last day with? At the time, Naruto had brushed it off as a silly question. There was no way any of the ways Iruka had described for the world to end were going to happen. But now that he was facing his own death, he thought he finally understood the purpose of that assignment. He closed his eyes and tried to think of someone, anyone who mattered enough, or more specifically, anyone who felt he mattered enough. He had no memories of his parents, and had deliberately forgotten his other caretakers because of the lack of affection they had given him, so they were out of the question. He tried to think of his fellow classmates, namely Kiba, Shikamaru, and Choji. While it was true the four of them had often skipped class together to go fool around, Naruto didn't feel like they had ever truly been his friends. Even his fellow, dead lasts, had only seemed to tolerate him at best, taking more interest in how they were choosing to fool around than the fact they were doing so together. Everyone else treated him like he was the plague. Well, everyone except for Hinata, but that co-person had made it clear that she wasn't allowed to have anything to do with him. And even if that weren't the case, she seemed like such a nice person that he knew he couldn't burden her with his sins. To do so would be selfish of him, and horrible for her. The thought of Hinata still lingered in his mind, though. Now that Naruto remembered their first meeting, he was tormented by the memory and his inability to understand why he had forgotten it for so long. But given what had happened in that meeting, he felt he was unworthy of her friendship. Why else would he have neglected to seek her out during the time they attended the academy? And yet, there was something about Hinata that made him hesitate, just for the slightest moment, and want to reconsider what he was about to do. Naruto was convinced of his own worthlessness, but perhaps in another life, he might have been allowed to pursue Hinata. Sure, when she wasn't showing her cute blush she looked fairly plain compared to some of the other girls in his class, but she was far more gentle than they were, and, who am I kidding? Naruto quickly derailed that train of thought. Sakura made it clear that no one would ever like me, least of all someone like Hinata. As for Sakura, now that she had opened his eyes to his cruel fate, Naruto no longer knew why he had ever sought out her affections. Empathizing with her desire for acknowledgement wasn't enough to explain it anymore. Had he simply been so desperate to prove he could win someone over that he had latched onto the person he thought he had the best chance of convincing? If that were the case, then he had been so very wrong to try, just as he had been so very wrong in everything else in his life. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe he simply did not deserve to be acknowledged, let alone loved. Being alone his entire life, Naruto had no way of understanding what it was like to be loved. His need to discover that feeling drove him to single out Sakura and emulate the crush she had on Sasuke, but it worked a little too well. Sakura rejected him every time, just as Sasuke rejected her and everyone else every time. That wasn't supposed to be what happened. Love was supposed to be a good thing, but as Naruto reflected on it, the shattered pieces of his soul continued to break apart as he remembered every time he had been shunned by others in his pursuit of love. All he had ever wanted was to find someone who would fill his empty heart with love, Someone who would help him get the rest of the village to accept his own love. But there was not a single person alive who was capable of giving him what he needed most. And because of that, just as he had always lived alone, he would ultimately die alone. No matter how hard he searched his feelings, Naruto could not find an answer to Iruka's question. All he could find was the pain of loneliness, and it was a pain he could no longer endure. Damn it, I still can't think of anyone, Naruto shouted, trying in vain to force back the tears that were as stubborn as he was. He took one last look at the village below him, then reached behind his head to untie the Hite-8 Iruka-sensei gave him for passing his final exam at the academy and let it fall first. I won't even get to die as a true shinobi, he lamented, his last words that no one would either hear or listen to. He closed his eyes for what he thought would be the last time and allowed himself to plunge into the depths of the hell he was convinced he deserved. He did not fall very far before hearing a cry of anguish, and his fall was stopped just as quickly as it had started. Stunned that his fall had been broken so soon, Naruto opened his eyes and looked up to see that someone had jumped off after him, and was grabbing onto one of his arms while trying to use her other arm to pull them back up onto the top of the fourth's head. And to his complete horror, it did not take Naruto as long as it had the last time he saw her to recognize his would-be rescuer. "What are you doing here?" Naruto cried. The girl who was trying to stop him from falling to his death, but would also die if she failed, was none other than Hinata. Earlier that night, 3 years and 10 months. That was how long had passed since Hinata's first encounter with Naruto, and how long it had taken her to build up the confidence to speak to him on her own after all the psychological abuse she had suffered from the Hyuga clan. Only to have it mercilessly crushed at the worst possible moment. Upon her forced return to the Hyuga estate, Ko had informed her father and the other elders of Hinata's interrupted conversation with Naruto after her class was dismissed. To Hinata's surprise, Hyuga Hiyashi did not scold her for daring to go against the elders' warnings. But she was so used to hearing her father demean her that she still expected him to remind her of her worthlessness later that night. The treatment Hiyashi gave her helped her relate to Naruto's own suffering. If Hiyashi wasn't verbally abusing her, he pretended that she didn't exist. Hinata couldn't understand why her own clansmen and the rest of the villagers were so adamant in their stance against Naruto. What had Naruto done wrong in the past that could make him universally despised? Hinata was well aware that Naruto was a prankster, and while she did not condone his behavior, she understood that all he was trying to do was get people's attention. That was why she was drawn to Naruto, why she sought out his presence as often as she could. Naruto understood the pain of loneliness better than anyone, yet he did not succumb to it. Hinata admired Naruto for his strength. She wanted to find that strength within herself, and she also wanted to help ease his pain. She had pushed herself so hard to get closer to him, and yet it was all for nothing. She had become aware shortly after enrolling in the academy of how the team selection process was handled, and had been determined to make sure she was placed on the same team as Naruto. To succeed had required her to demonstrate during her time in class that her strengths and weaknesses made her the most compatible kunoichi to pair with Naruto. To achieve this goal, Hinata had worked and studied tirelessly to keep her grades up, more for Naruto's sake than for the recognition of her father, who only enrolled her in the academy because she had failed to meet the Hyuga clan's standards and lost her position as heiress. But as she had found out today, all her efforts were for naught. Sakura was the kunoichi chosen to be on Naruto's team, and the decision left Hinata feeling discouraged. But that was not the only reason Hinata was upset. It was not in her nature to lose herself to anger, but the way Sakura treated Naruto infuriated her. The only crime Naruto had ever committed against his pink-haired teammate was wanting to show her affection, but it was a severe enough offense in Sakura's mind that Sakura abused Naruto for it, both verbally and physically. And then there was Sasuke. Hinata could not see what her female classmates saw in the last loyal Uchiha. They all viewed him as cool and collected, obsessing over his natural talent, but Hinata saw through Sasuke's stoic facade and recognized his unhealthy obsessions. Sasuke was Naruto's opposite in almost every aspect, and Hinata could not see anything good in store for anyone who continued to pursue the Uchiha as a love interest. While Hiyashi had not scolded Hinata for trying to speak with Naruto, he had placed an increased guard on her to make sure she stayed on clan grounds until tomorrow morning, when she would have to leave for her team assignment. Hinata was forced to wait for them to be called off in order to sneak out of the estate through her bedroom window, and when she did get free, she knew she would have to find Naruto fast, before anyone noticed her absence. She searched everywhere she knew, from her personal observations she made over the many times she had followed Naruto in secret, that he was likely to be found, starting with Ramen Ichiraku, then his apartment, then the academy, and then the third training ground, all while trying to stay out of sight of everyone but the few people in Konoha who weren't hostile towards Naruto. When she couldn't find Naruto at any of those places, she tried one last location, the Hokage Rock. And as she ran up the stairs, scanning the location with her Byakugan, that was when she noticed Naruto laying down on the ground, dangerously close to falling off the edge, but refusing to get up. This brought out a gasp from Hinata, and she tried to run up to him to pull him to safety, but when he started to get up on his own and back himself away from the cliff, she was forced to hide. For several minutes, Hinata stayed behind a nearby tree as Naruto tried to calm himself and walked back towards the edge. She watched with great trepidation as Naruto sat down on top of the stone carving of the fourth Hokage's head. She deactivated her dojutsu and followed Naruto, being careful to do so quietly so he wouldn't notice her and be startled enough to fall off. Hinata wanted nothing more than to call out Naruto's name and lead him back towards her, towards the safety she could provide, but with her confidence still shattered and his being in such a dangerous spot, she was forced to stay silent. Whether it was a blessing or a curse, she completely escaped Naruto's notice even as she made it to the edge of the cliff and started watching him from above. Hinata had secretly spied on several of Naruto's private training sessions outside of class and was well aware of the attitudes he'd frequently display. So she knew right away that something was wrong with Naruto as he continued to sit, appearing to be lost in thought. His head would turn ever so slightly, not enough to catch her in his peripheral vision, but enough that Hinata could notice how his cheeks were wet from tears. This observation only made her grow more concerned for Naruto. This was the first time she had ever seen him cry. And when he started speaking, the anguish in his voice nearly caused her to give away her position. So this is how a Hokage sees the world, huh? Naruto had asked himself before going silent again. Hinata was confused. If Naruto was just thinking about his dream to become Hokage, then she thought that he shouldn't be this upset. Her confusion grew worse when he went on, but I guess I'll never know for sure. Is Naruto-kun doubting that he'll achieve his dream? Hinata asked herself. I should be down there with Naruto to reassure him, not watching from up here like a coward, but... Her confidence was so badly wrecked that she couldn't even complete that sentence in her own head. She could only watch as Naruto looked towards the market district, physically unable to reach out to him as he fell deeper into a proverbial abyss. Were my parents like that? Hinata's confusion was about to soar at that question from Naruto before he added, or would they have hated me too? Was I so much of a burden on them that they really just abandoned me like Sakura claimed? Hinata covered her hands to muffle the gasp that escaped her mouth. She then started shaking in anger as she still unwillingly remained rooted to the spot where she stood. Now she knew why Naruto was in so much pain tonight. Sakura had said something that was far worse than her usual insults, and dealt him a greater injury than her fists alone were capable of inflicting. She should have jumped down right then and there, but her legs refused to move. Her own insecurities continued to paralyze her in these critical moments. I guess there really wasn't much of a point in becoming Hokage anyway, she heard Naruto say as she watched him stand up. I just wanted people to acknowledge me. But now I know that even if I did achieve my dream, they'd still find a way to ignore me. Naruto-kun is giving up his dream? Hinata's heart broke for Naruto as she listened to his sorrow, helpless to do what she knew she should be doing. Did Sakura-san really hurt Naruto-kun that badly? Damn it, I still can't think of anyone. Naruto shouted. His voice was filled with more pain and sorrow than Hinata had ever experienced, more than anyone should be forced to endure. Tears began blurring her vision to the point that she almost could not see Naruto walking forward, removing his hite-8 and letting it fall out of his hand towards the ground below. She rubbed her eyes to clear out the tears, and what she saw and heard next would haunt her for the rest of her life, however long it lasted after tonight. I won't even get to die as a true shinobi, Naruto lamented. His arms were spread and his eyes closed, surrendering himself to the abyss that would claim his life. No, Hinata cried out in anguish, jumping down to stop Naruto. She was already too late to stop him from jumping, but she knew that if she did not stop his fall now, She might as well let herself fall to her own death right there, because she could not fathom the thought of living without him. Hinata jumped off the fourth's head and grabbed at Naruto's arms, barely managing to get a hold of him with her right arm, then pushed chakra into her left hand and tried to keep herself fastened to the fourth's cheek. Having Naruto's entire body weight pulling down on her arm placed heavy strain on her muscles, and she was already losing her strength as she desperately hung on for dear life. For her life, and his. And Naruto, realizing his fall had been stopped, gave her a look of horror as he cried out to her, "What are you doing here?" Hinata groaned in pain as she struggled to keep her grip on the stone carving of the fourth Hokage's head. Her legs flailed uselessly as she could not manage to plant her feet on the cheek for necessary leverage, not without allowing Naruto to fall. Trying to keep her grip on him was causing the muscles in her right arm to tear, and she lacked the physical strength necessary to throw him back over the cliff. Naruto himself wasn't making her struggle any easier, he was trying to pull himself free, and it took everything Hinata had in her to maintain her grip on him. "Hinata, what are you doing? Why did you come here?" Naruto demanded. "I should be the one asking you those questions, Naruto." Hinata answered with her own demand. "Why are you trying to kill yourself? It's none of your business." Naruto was vehement in his insistence on making her drop him. "Just let me go. Save yourself while you still can." But Hinata was equally stubborn in her insistence on holding onto him. "I can't do that. I won't do it," she yelled back, grimacing from the pain racking her arm. It did not go unnoticed by Naruto. Nor did the fact her other hand, the one stopping them from plummeting to their deaths, was scraping against the surface of the rock and starting to leave a trail of blood as his weight pulled her down. "Hinata, this is insane. You can't hold on forever, so let me go." "No." Hinata shook her head violently, and some of her tears landed on Naruto's face. "If you fall, I'll fall with you. What the hell are you talking about? Don't waste your life on someone like me, Hinata. My life isn't worth giving up yours. Don't you dare say that." "Hinata, just," Naruto tried to say, but Hinata stopped him in mid-sentence by locking eyes with him. Her facial expression shook Naruto down to his core. Her eyes were filled with tears and she looked like she was in greater emotional agony than she was physical. Yet she was giving him a stern look in spite of that pain. "Listen to me, Naruto-kun," Hinata begged. "Please don't say your life isn't worth it. That's just not true. If your life is worthless, then mine is equally so. It is true, Hinata. I'm just a burden to everyone. All I do is mess things up and hurt people or get them angry. My entire existence is a sin and I can't redeem it. But you aren't like me. You're one of the few people in this village who's nice and caring. My dream was selfish, but you're not. I may not know much about you, but you've shown me enough that your life is more precious than mine. So please just let me go." Naruto just couldn't understand why Hinata was risking herself for him now. Or why anyone would. He was so completely convinced that his own existence did not matter. Which made it all the more confusing and painful for him when Hinata asked, "Who told you that you were worthless?" Naruto wanted to respond that it didn't matter. There were so many who did not bother to hide this truth from him. Yet he couldn't. He was still overwhelmed by his confusion over Hinata's actions towards him. "Even if the entire village told you that, Naruto-kun, they are wrong," Hinata continued. "Even if they believe you are worthless, I do not. What do you know?" Naruto shouted. "We only met once before today. Every day when you can afford it, you visit Ramen Ichiraku. Your favorite order is miso ramen with extra char-siu. So what? Everyone knows that about me." Sakura said it's disgusting. "After class, you frequently go to the third training ground and don't return to your apartment until well into the night." Hinata ignored Naruto's protests. "You always leave a spare key underneath your mailbox, but you never go in right away. And every time you walk inside and shout out, 'I'm home,' to the empty apartment, it breaks your heart just a little more, knowing there's no one there to welcome you home." Naruto's eyes widened and he stopped struggling to get free of Hinata's grip. How does she know all of that? He wondered. It did not occur to him that she might have been watching him since that day. "Each morning, as part of your daily routine, you water the plants you keep inside your apartment. Then when you finish your morning rituals, you run towards school so you won't be late, because you can't stand receiving a lecture from Iruka-sensei over tardiness. On occasion, you would skip class with Kiba-kun, Choji-kun and Shikamaru-kun, though I was never able to join you on those days. Regardless of what happened in class, You frequently lingered around after school ends for the day, sitting by yourself on the swing outside of our classroom, watching as everyone else goes home to their families. You have a bitter rivalry with Sasuke-san and a hopeless crush on Sakura-san. But they and everyone else are so set in their beliefs that any victories you achieve are dismissed as a fluke. Naruto was lost for words. Hinata had described almost every aspect of his daily life better than he could, if anyone ever decided to ask. A lot of it was stuff everyone knew, but she had also described things that no one but him knew were part of his life. There was a certain level of intimacy in her knowledge of him, and it was too much for him to bear. How do you know so much about me? Naruto finally asked. That isn't all I know about you, Naruto-kun, Hinata answered. I know that in spite of the treatment you receive from the people of this village, you still care for them. You claim that you want to become Hokage because you want to be acknowledged, but buried deep within that claim is the need to protect the very people whose acknowledgement you seek. You want to be able to take care of them like you take care of your plants, and place their needs above your own. Tell me, Naruto-kun. She broke off her speech for a few moments and closed her eyes, and Naruto felt more of her tears land on his face. How is that selfish? How does that make your existence a sin? Naruto found it impossible to believe what he was hearing. Yet he knew Hinata wasn't lying or trying to deceive him, because if she was, she would not have risked her life to save him. Her words resonated deeply within him and brought out feelings he could not describe, because they were so foreign. He wondered if these feelings were what it was supposed to feel like to have someone truly care about him. But why did she care? Even if she was just a good person in general, why would Hinata go so far for him? If Naruto had asked those questions aloud, Hinata would not have been able to provide an answer. She couldn't describe the true extent of her own feelings, but she believed with all her heart that if Naruto were to die, she would not be able to continue living in a world that lacked his warm presence. And you're wrong about something else, Naruto-kun, Hinata went on, visibly struggling to find the courage to continue her speech to Naruto as she simultaneously struggled to keep them anchored to the Hokage rock. I'm the one who's worthless, not you. You want people to see you for who you really are. You want them to let you protect them. But me? I don't care about any of that. I only have one desire, but acting on it now makes me selfish. Hinata, please, Naruto said half-heartedly. His resolve was starting to waver, and yet he couldn't stand to hear any more from her. Please just let go of me. If you sacrifice yourself, it'll only prove that everything I touch gets ruined. No, I won't, I can't. Hinata shook her head again as she continued to deny Naruto the death he didn't deserve. I just told you that I'm being selfish. The one thing I truly want, and her voice trailed off again for a few more painful seconds, only long enough to lock eyes with Naruto again. The one thing I desire above all else is to protect you. But why? At this point, Naruto was so astounded by Hinata's claims that he was second-guessing his decision to jump to his death. I don't get it, Hinata. Why would you go so far for someone like me? He asked, every centimeter of his face etched with the desperate need to understand. And Hinata's answer to that question would remind him of why he had struggled so hard in the first place to gain everything he had been denied. Do I need a reason to help someone? Naruto yet again was rendered speechless by her words. No, his words, that he'd once spoken to her on a cold winter day. They were the words that had given Hinata the drive to change herself for the better, one little bit at a time. Those words had changed Hinata's life. And hearing Hinata say them to him now caused Naruto's entire perspective on her to change as well. Had he really made such an impact on her that day, that he inspired her to adopt his approach to life, to never give up no matter what? Unfortunately for them both, Hinata's chakra reserves chose that moment to give out on her. Hinata felt her hand detach from the stone carving, and as her strength failed her, she could only look on in horror while she and Naruto resumed their fatal fall. Naruto had only a few seconds to figure out how he was going to save Hinata. He frantically pulled her into his arms, hoping that his body would absorb enough of the impact to save her life. And for the first and last time in his life, as he cradled Hinata in his arms, he uttered a silent prayer to whichever higher power might have it in them to listen. Please, if there's a God out there somewhere, please give me the strength to protect something just this once. The last thing he felt before his world turned to black was a large tree branch smacking the back of his head. Back at the Hyuga estate, Hiyashi was busying himself with the more menial tasks that were required of a person in his station. As one of the more influential shinobi clan heads in Hai no Kuni, He was often bogged down by the paperwork associated with various propositions, both from civilians and from allied shinobi clans which resided outside of Konoha. Paperwork was not only the bane of a Hokage's existence, and there would occasionally be times when Hiyoshi's mind was filled with thoughts that were unbecoming of a Hyuga. Wishes for a return to when his duties were simpler. Physically, Hiyoshi was an imposing figure. At 176.5 centimeters, his height was somewhat taller than average. He dressed traditionally, donning a set of loose-fitting robes with a long-sleeved brown haori, which was exceedingly simple attire for someone with his status. But in no way did that attire take away from the presence he carried. Hiyoshi set aside the paperwork for a few seconds and quietly activated his Byakugan, focusing its vision on his eldest daughter's room. Unsurprisingly, Hinata had taken it upon herself to escape from her confinements. While he expected her to slip past the notice of her guards, he was also not amused by her continued disobedience, nor by the incompetence shown by those guards in allowing her to escape. Hiyoshi stood and walked to the door of his private chambers. "Ko-san," he called out. In an instant, Hinata's chief bodyguard was outside the door, kneeling in front of him. "You summoned me, Hiyoshi-sama?" Ko inquired. "It would appear that you have shown negligence in your duties yet again." Hiyoshi crossed his arms and tilted his head slightly, indicating the direction of Hinata's bedroom. Ko sighed and activated his own Byakugan to confirm that his charge had escaped the premises yet again. "Forgive me, sir. Hinata-sama is quite adventurous." "That is an interesting choice of words for you to describe her infatuation with Uzumaki," Hiyoshi observed. Ko gulped. He had been aware of Hinata's crush on Uzumaki almost as soon as she started taking to following the boy, and it had not taken long for Hiyoshi to notice it as well. He told Hinata many times to stay away from the boy, shutting down any attempts she made to ask why, only for her to continue to seek him out. Hiyoshi himself had tried to turn a blind eye to what Hinata chose to do in her free time, but her actions reflected poorly on the clan as a whole. Every time she sneaked away to indulge in her favorite pastime, Hiyoshi risked a confrontation with the elders, who were much quicker than he to express their displeasure with her behavior. Wasting time on the elders was not a luxury they could afford. I recall giving explicit instructions to prevent such an occurrence. And yet here I am, wasting more time by pointing out to you that this is the fourth time over the past week she has ran off to watch Uzumaki. As far as I am aware, Hinata-sama had never made direct contact with the boy until this afternoon, sir, Ko pointed out, a weak and futile attempt at putting up a defense. Irrelevant. I do not have the time to humor her petty crush, not when many of the elders believe we should ignore established clan law and mark her with the clan's cursed seal, banishing her to the branch house. Need I remind you that it is your fault she likes the boy in the first place? Had you been doing your job that day when those miscreants targeted her, she and Uzumaki would never have met. Hiyoshi was referring to the day Hinata had been sent to enroll in the academy, 3 years and 10 months ago. How Hinata had managed to escape Ko's notice then, Ko still had not figured out. Perhaps if Hinata had been born into any other clan, she would be commended by her clansmen for her knack for escape. I have heard quite enough of your excuses, Ko. Gather a search party and bring her back. I don't care if you have to drag her back here or even rough her up a little. Make sure she understands this time how many problems her disobedience creates for herself and for the rest of the clan. Understood, Hiyoshi-sama. Ko acknowledged the order and disappeared. Hiyoshi was just about to return to his work when he sensed another presence, and decided not to move at all. He did not have to turn around or activate his Byakugan to confirm the identity of the intruder who was sitting at his desk, looking over his paperwork. "Sandame," Hiyoshi addressed him. "Even though you are the Hokage, it is still rude to show up unannounced." "Hiyoshi-san, I see the years have made you into a stickler for tradition," Hiruzen replied, also not moving a single muscle other than to speak. "They have also apparently caused you to forget your manners." Hiyoshi scoffed at the pointless observations. "I take it this is not a courtesy call." "Afraid not. I was about to notify you that you have been summoned, but when I overheard that interesting conversation, I decided to give you the courtesy of allowing it to finish first." Which Hiyoshi understood to mean the Hokage was letting him set himself up to be humiliated. "May I ask why you have come here to summon me in person?" Hiruzen did not answer right away. Instead, he stood and walked outside to stand next to Hiyoshi, then lit his tobacco pipe and took a long puff, while appearing to contemplate what to say. He continued to remain silent for a few minutes, something which was unusual enough that it would have elicited a comment were he not here in person. Whatever had happened, had caused the Hokage a great deal more stress than usual. "Walk with me, Hiyashi-san," Hiruzen finally commanded. "I must return to the hospital to oversee the treatment of 2 high-priority patients. When we arrive, I will tell you the reason for this summoning." "Very good, sir," Hiyashi said, stepping back inside his chambers only long enough to slip on a pair of sandals before joining the Hokage outside the estate. The walk continued in silence up until they arrived at the main lobby on the first floor, when Hiruzen decided to speak. "There was an attempted suicide about an hour ago," he said, and Hiyashi was quick to detect the regret in his voice as they walked down the hallway. "If it were anyone else informing me of some fool who decided it wasn't worth it to keep living, I would question why they were wasting my time," Hiyashi commented. "You know full well that he isn't an ordinary fool, Hiyashi-san. The boy who tried to end his own life tonight is none other than Uzumaki Naruto." Hiyashi's eyes widened a tiny fraction, and the muscles in his face twitched violently. It was the most telling reaction Hiruzen saw from him in this meeting. The Hokage recognized that Hiyashi was struggling with what he wanted to say. Words spoken with emotion were not permitted by Hyuga decorum, nor by the social protocols which applied to their conversation. It took 10 seconds for the Hyuga in Hiyashi to win out and suppress the emotional response he should have made. "It would appear that I overestimated the boy's tenacity. A shame. He would have made a fine shinobi once someone managed to set him straight." "Spare me your crude remarks, Hiyashi. We both know you don't care about Naruto." Hiruzen tried to provoke the emotional response again, only to be disappointed by Hiyashi's next reply. "It is unbecoming of you to put words in other people's mouths, Sarutobi." Hiyashi repaid Hiruzen's disrespect by addressing him by his clan name and without honorifics, and otherwise showed only annoyance with that attempt. Uzumaki's exploits in the academy were interesting enough. But a man in my station has more pressing matters than to worry himself about whether any action he might take for the boy's benefit would be interpreted as a violation of your law, or would lead to a violation. Does acting in Naruto's benefit include the efforts you have made to prevent Hinata from befriending him? What Hinata does in her spare time is of no concern to me." It was spoken too quickly and with all the characteristics of a canned reply. "The problem is with my father, who usually makes no effort to hide his disdain towards her. Arguments of that sort usually grow very heated in a short time. As the clan head, I must keep the elders in check and I must maintain certain appearances. If your objective is to save face, then it is an exercise in futility," Hiruzen said grimly, opening a door close to the end of the hallway and walking down the stairwell. What few emergency and operating rooms were located in the basement levels of Konoha General Hospital were typically reserved for specific patients with specific cases. As Hiyashi followed Hiruzen down the stairs leading to these rooms, he realized that he did not like where this meeting was headed. "As I said before, a suicide was attempted by Naruto," Hiruzen continued as they approached Naruto's room. "Thankfully, the attempt failed, but the fact the attempt was allowed to be made creates a serious crisis for this village. Naruto still sustained serious injuries, fracturing his skull, several ribs and both legs, but they will all be repaired in time. Whether the damage to his psyche can be repaired remains to be seen." "What did Uzumaki do? Jump off the Hokage rock?" Hiyashi asked. The stern look Hiruzen gave him caused him to immediately regret asking. Naruto must have thought that would be the swiftest way to end his life. Someone else managed to intervene and prevented his injuries from proving fatal. Hiruzen stopped a few meters away from his destination, to increase the emphasis on his next words. "Hiyashi-san, you claim that your eldest daughter's actions do not concern you. If I were you, I would have retracted that statement before we arrived here." He walked forward to open the door, gesturing for Hiyashi to look inside, and sure enough, the first person Hiyashi saw confined to the beds was not Naruto, but Hinata. The sight of his injured daughter finally caused Hiyashi to lose control over his anger. "What the hell was she doing up there?" Hiyashi demanded. "And why didn't you stop me from sending Ko out to locate her?" The demand he should have made, but did not have the necessary clout to get away with it, was why didn't you do anything to stop Uzumaki from attempting suicide? When I arrived at the scene, she was huddled over Naruto, screaming out his name. Hiruzen ignored the Hyuga Patriarch's demands. She passed out shortly afterward. Naruto, bless his heart, tried to absorb the impact, but Hinata did not come out of the fall unscathed. She suffered a concussion, broke her right arm and leg, and scraped most of the skin off her left hand. Her physical injuries will heal. But like Naruto, it is unknown whether her mind will recover from this traumatic event. Hiyashi backed away from the door and clenched his fists. Damn it all. Why hasn't that girl learned how to listen? Are you saying that because you actually care for her well-being or because you are trying to perform damage control? Hiruzen prodded. It earned him a glare from the Hyuga patriarch. Why does it matter? Once Hinata recovers, she will return to the estate and resume her duties as a Hyuga. It is a rare occasion when I am caught by surprise, Hiyashi. I expected you to disown her after this incident. Regardless, your latest mistake is in assuming that I will permit Hinata to return to your clan's estate after she is released from here. Hiyashi intensified his glare as he locked eyes with Hiruzen. Out of all the shinobi loyal to Konoha, Sarutobi Hiruzen was one of only 3 who could get under Hyuga Hiyashi's skin like that. Hiruzen, often called the Professor, was renowned throughout the 5 great shinobi nations for his exceptional skill and wisdom, and was one of the few who earned the legendary title of God of Shinobi. Even in his advanced age, there was a reason why he had been called upon to reclaim the position of Hokage after his successor's death. The other 2 were Jiraiya of the Sannin, whose perversions were as infamous as his feats in the 2 major wars in which he fought, and Shimura Danzo, disgraced former member of the Konoha Council and a man Hiyashi could not respect in any capacity. Everyone who was unfortunate enough to have dealings with Danzo remained wary of the Warhawk's treachery. Hiyashi was well aware of the history between Hiruzen and Danzo. The 2 clashing elder figures had once served as teammates under a platoon led by the second Hokage, and they were said to represent light and shadow. Yet as he stood here now, Hiyashi felt that Hiruzen's behavior was more typical of Danzo, with just a hint of Jiraiya's mannerisms mixed in, than it was his own. May I ask what your plans for her are? Hiyashi said carefully. I cannot answer that question at this time, because I honestly do not know, Hiruzen said. Inoichi-san will arrive shortly to scan Naruto's mind and discover the cause of this incident as well as determine the extent of the damage to his mind. Afterward, Naruto and Hinata's Jonin instructors will be briefed on his findings. Only then will I come to a decision on what role Hinata will play in Naruto's recovery, and which information you need to know in regards to my decision. He resisted the urge to light up his pipe again as he analyzed Hiyashi's inner thoughts. Do you have any problem with this? I will again point out that you said, what Hinata does in her spare time is of no concern to you. With all due respect, Hokage-sama, it is dangerous to meddle in clan matters. The elders will not be the only ones who will be displeased to learn that you have stepped in. Frankly, I don't give a damn. This stopped being a clan matter when Naruto made the choice to take his own life. As it is now an issue of village security, I will be taking most of the responsibility for how it is addressed. If you handle your end correctly, it may even reflect positively on your clan's reputation. Hiyashi closed his eyes for a moment to consider the scenario as described by Hiruzen. With the Hokage becoming personally involved, the elders would not be able to abuse their standing in the clan to demand answers. Hiruzen had also hinted that there was a possibility his response would include emancipating Hinata from the clan, which would relieve Hiyashi of any responsibilities towards her, eliminate the threat of the elders going against clan law and branding her with the caged bird cursed seal, and possibly give her a chance to live in happiness. Provided everything played out in just the right way, it was a win-win. But the incident which brought this on didn't make any sense whatsoever. Why would Uzumaki try to kill himself? Hiyashi whispered. And just after graduating from the academy? Hiruzen neglected to answer right away, instead closing the door to the room where Naruto and Hinata were recuperating. And Hinata has never been subtle when it came to expressing her feelings for the boy. There is no way this can be a coincidence. Hiruzen turned back to face Hiyashi, and for the first time in years, the third Hokage's eyes were burning with righteous anger. It would be in your best interests to instruct the rest of your clan to cease their alienation of Naruto immediately, he spoke in a tone that left no room for any answer other than complete obedience. I have yet to confirm all of the relevant details, but shortly after Iruka dismissed his students today, Hinata attempted to congratulate Naruto for graduating, only for Ko to step in and reprimand your daughter for speaking with the boy, displaying a powerful killing intent towards him. His actions will require a steep punishment. As you know, the laws I put in place to protect Naruto from the hatred of his fellow villagers have failed to work as I intended. His peers have largely taken after their parents and shunned him, and he has not been able to make even a single friend. Today should have changed that. Today, Naruto should have made his first real friend, but she was cruelly taken away from him for no justifiable reason. Take the rest of the night to think on that, Hiyashi. You are dismissed. As Hiyashi walked away, he clenched his fists harder, making no attempt to hide his fury. This was nothing less than a complete humiliation for him. But once he returned to the estate, a certain bodyguard was going to pay dearly for his role in this catastrophe. Hiruzen sighed deeply as Hiyashi stewed in his anger during his departure. He could still remember a time when the Hyuga clan's head would have shown the concern any father should when learning his daughter was seriously injured. Hiruzen knew he was partially to blame for why Hiyashi had turned cold. He had fallen victim to the Raikage's blackmail and allowed the Hyuga clan to sacrifice Hiyashi's twin brother after the clan head had foiled a kidnapping attempt against Hinata on her 3rd birthday and killed the would-be kidnapper, who just so happened to be the head ninja of Kumogakure. Coupled with the loss of his wife a few years after the so-called Hyuga affair, and it was little wonder why Hiyashi became the way he is now. And there was nothing Hiruzen could do to address the issue of Hiyashi's broken soul. For now, all he could do was try and mend the damage to the 2 souls in the room in front of him. A few minutes passed before the sound of footsteps was heard again coming from the staircase leading to the ground floor. Hiruzen did not have to avert his gaze to know that the other clan head he'd summoned had arrived. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Inoichi-san," Hiruzen addressed the new arrival. "You summoned me, Hokage-sama," came the reply from one Yamanaka Inoichi. "But the message your Anbu left was vague. Could you kindly explain to me why the summons was so urgent? You'll find out as soon as you walk through that door. But I must warn you, you will not like what you see inside." Hiruzen opened the door and walked inside first. When Inoichi followed, he was immediately and deeply disturbed by the sight that awaited his eyes. Hinata had been stripped of her regular bulky outfit and was covered only by a thin green hospital gown along with bandages that were wrapped around most of her body, and blood had soaked through some of the wrappings. Her right arm and leg were encased in bulky white casts and were suspended above the bed by numerous wires affixed to the ceiling, and intravenous drips were inserted into her left arm, replenishing lost blood and keeping her hydrated. As for Naruto, he looked even worse. Both of his legs were also in casts and suspended above the bed, and the rest of his body, including his head, was covered in bandages and stitches, with only his face and a tiny spot on his left arm for IV drips left exposed to the air. "What on earth happened to them?" Inoichi asked, clearly horrified by the sight. He was more horrified when Hiruzen flinched from the question before shaking his head. "Naruto tried to kill himself by jumping off the Hokage rock," Hiruzen said in a somber tone. "Regrettably, I was caught in an important meeting with the daimyo's wife at the time the incident occurred and was not able to keep surveillance on Naruto through my crystal ball. By the time the meeting ended, he had already made the jump. Hinata was the only person who knew what was happening and tried to stop him, only to receive injuries that are almost as serious as his. But had she not intervened when she did, Naruto would not still be alive." Inoichi snapped around to glare directly into Hiruzen's eyes. "It's no wonder Hiyashi-san was so unsettled when I passed by him on my way here. Shijimi Dono is not held in high regard by most of the clans in this village. And if that is your... Take great care in what you say next, Inoichi," Hiruzen warned the Yamanaka clan head. Inoichi sighed and blinked several times. The very idea that Naruto would be allowed to attempt suicide, and that a civilian, no matter how important that civilian was to the village, could have been at least partially responsible for the absence of surveillance on Naruto. There were no words to adequately describe Inoichi's frustration with the Hokage. And he was left without the option of expressing that frustration. "What you just told me doesn't make any sense," was all that Inoichi could say. Why would Naruto do this? Hiruzen again resisted the urge to light up his tobacco pipe for stress relief. "Hiyashi-san asked the same question before I dismissed him, Inoichi-san. That question is why you are here. We are short on time and need answers as quickly as you can find them. Naruto has never shown any signs of experiencing suicidal thoughts. His mind was abnormally resilient in the face of the neglect he suffered his entire life. But tonight, Naruto proved that even he had his limits. Go inside his mind and find out what pushed him past those limits. Despite the urgency in the Hokage's voice, Inoichi not only failed to immediately comply with the order, he actually took a step backward. Hiruzen was about to repeat his order when he saw the same thing in Inoichi's eyes that he had seen earlier in Hiashi's. Specifically, an unspoken demand. He did not need to have the mental ninjutsu of the Yamanaka clan to know what Inoichi really thought of this mess, or to know that even though Inoichi had already stepped out of line, he did not feel he could do so again by speaking his thoughts, even if Shikaku and Chozo were present to back him up. Inoichi, please. I am no longer ordering you as your Hokage. I am asking as an old man who has failed too many times to do what needed to be done. I know you wish to make a demand of me. You want to know why I let this happen. And I promise you will have the answers you seek. But first, we must try to rectify this failure. Inoichi nodded, appearing temporarily satisfied with the promise of answers. Understood, sir. But I will hold you to your word. Hiruzen's only reply was a reluctant nod as Inoichi walked forward and placed his right hand on Naruto's head. This is Naruto's mindscape? Inoichi wondered aloud just a few seconds after using the Psycho Denshin to gain entry. In his many years since he first became a shinobi, he had viewed more than his fair share of mindscapes that showed various levels of deterioration in their owner's mental conditions, but he could not recall viewing one that was as bad as Naruto's. His surroundings took the form of an abandoned industrial plant, but he could see that the structure was in very poor condition. Several of the lights were burned out or broken, while the pipes running along the walls were badly rusted, and the walls themselves were crumbling apart. What happened to him to cause this? An ill-mannered human such as yourself needs to learn not to stick his nose where it doesn't belong, or to ask questions to which he already knows the answers, came the immediate, and unexpected, answer from an evil entity. Inoichi spun around to see a massive metal gate behind him, locked with an ofuda bearing the kanji for seal. Behind it stood a colossal orange fox with sinister red eyes, ears that resembled a rabbit's, and human hands instead of paws. 9 large tails were waving behind the creature and it bared all of its teeth at Inoichi. But Inoichi stood his ground against it. The only being here that doesn't belong is you, 9-tailed demon fox, Inoichi said, a clear statement of challenge. Yondaime should never have sealed you inside Naruto. He should have taken you with him into the Shinigami's stomach. The Kyuubi, the creature that had nearly destroyed Konoha when it was released from its former container over 12 years ago, snorted at Inoichi's defiance. Your feeble attempt to take the moral high ground disgusts me. You humans are commonly consumed and corrupted by your lust for power. You think nothing about trying to bring superior beings to heal and steal their power for yourselves, and even less of who among your kind you have to sacrifice to control that power. What gave you the gall to appear here? What sacrifice do you demand from me or my pitiful container? Inoichi's breath hitched slightly from the Kyuubi's guttural voice. He, like most of the adult population of Konoha, had witnessed the Kyuubi's attack on Konoha and knew full well about the monster fox being sealed inside of Naruto, and he had a high enough standing in the village that he was privy to more than the basic details of that night. But the creature's imprisonment inside Naruto made it risky for Inoichi to enter Naruto's mindscape, so he did not believe he would see the Kyuubi again. And while he remained in the creature's evil presence, he was finding it increasingly difficult to stay calm. You are trying to reassure yourself that your mind is safe, the Kyuubi observed. Your thoughts ring loudly in my ears. Understand this. Your attempts to delude yourself into a sense of security are futile. I know the mechanics of the seal that keeps me imprisoned inside this pitiful child better than even that accursed Yondaime Hokage, who created the seal that keeps me here. And because of the brat's stupidity, the seal has weakened. I have bid my time since the moment I was sealed away, waiting for my opportunity to escape, and now it is so close I can already savor the taste of freedom. Where is Naruto? Inoichi demanded, filing away the Kyuubi's allegations to bring up to the Hokage later. The Kyuubi was less than impressed by him recomposing himself in the face of its attempts to cower him into fleeing. Don't pretend that you care about the kid. He is just a weapon to you, and a useless one at that, seeing as he has lost the will to live. The fall from the monument your village made to your wretched Hokage may not have killed him, but he will soon die regardless. Tell me where he is. Inoichi repeated his demand. The Kyuubi did not answer, but Inoichi received one anyway, but not like he had expected. He heard another voice behind him, murmuring something incomprehensible, and snapped around towards the back of the plant to investigate. He sprinted for what his mind perceived to be a distance of roughly 20 meters when the source of the voices became visible, and the sight he beheld ranked among the most horrific things he had seen in his life. Dear God, no! Naruto was sitting against the wall, legs pulled up to his chest, almost in a fetal position. The water underneath him had turned black, like spilled ink, and sections of the walls around him in that section of the mindscape had weakened even more than the rest of the plant, some of them having even collapsed entirely. Where those walls should have been, Inoichi instead saw a purplish void. He could only conclude that this was the innermost part of Naruto's mind, the part where he suppressed his darkest memories and feelings. If the deterioration were allowed to progress any further, Inoichi knew that Naruto's mind would collapse entirely. As Inoichi ran closer to Naruto, the scene took yet another turn for the worst. Numerous ghost-like silhouettes manifested and surrounded the boy, whispering words that were unintelligible to Inoichi, but clearly contributing further to Naruto's already dire psychological state. These images had to be representations of the many villagers who had shunned Naruto over the course of his childhood. No, stop it, Naruto moaned weakly. Leave me alone, please just leave me alone. Inoichi wasted no time in rushing towards Naruto and grabbing his shoulders, trying to bring him back to his senses. Snap out of it, Naruto, he yelled. Those images aren't real, so don't let them torment you. Naruto seemed to be able to recognize that he was speaking and looked up at him, and the expression in the boy's eyes caused Inoichi to flinch. His blue eyes were missing their pupils and his face had lost most of its color, giving Inoichi the impression that he was staring into the face of a ghost. Have you come to hurt me too? Naruto asked, his voice also devoid of life. What? No, Naruto, I'm here to. Please kill me, Naruto interrupted Inoichi, grabbing onto one of the Yamanaka clan head's arms. Please just kill me so I won't hurt anyone anymore. Please, I promise I'll be good. I promise I won't cause any more trouble. Inoichi recoiled from Naruto's words. It wasn't until he tried to move again that he realized he had not done so voluntarily. His confusion soared as the silhouettes began to disappear, only for another one to approach. He tried to reach out and pull Naruto away from the silhouette, but only found himself being pushed back farther. What the hell? Did Naruto's mind just repel me? Inoichi tried to move forward again, but was frozen in place as the new silhouette glowed with a brilliant white light and wrapped its arms around Naruto. For the briefest moment, Naruto's expression changed, seemingly finding some measure of comfort in this new presence's embrace. And in the next moment, both Naruto and the ghost vanished. Shaken by what he just witnessed, Inoichi marched back to the Kyuubi's cage and slammed his palms against the metal bars. What did you do to Naruto? He screamed at the Kyuubi, only for it to roar back with enough force to push him backward. You forget your place in this world, human. I have, thus far, done nothing to push my jailer over the edge. But I cannot say the same for you, the monster fox said in disgust. Stop being vague and speak clearly. The obvious is always elusive to your kind. You humans are the most pathetic species to inhabit this earth. You never own up to your own faults and choose instead to pin the blame on others, selecting the targets for your blame based on personal convenience. Your history shows time and time again that those you curse to host entities such as myself bear not only the hatred of the entity they contain, but the people whose protection is only secured by the sacrifices you force the accursed to make without their consent, and all without the decency of telling the chosen sacrifice why they must bear the hatred of their fellow humans. Your village is responsible for condemning this boy to an eternity of loneliness and misery. You forfeited the right to act self-righteous the night you allowed him to be set on this path. And if we are going to be honest, if I was capable of feeling anything other than hatred or apathy towards humans, I would almost feel sorry for the kid. Inoichi clenched his fists as he absorbed the Kyuubi's message. Loath as he was to admit it, the fox was right about him, and making this admission caused him to submerge himself in a sea of regret. Inoichi was one of the rare few adults in Konoha who did not hold any ill will towards Naruto for the burden the boy carried, but like everyone else in Konoha, he had chosen not to make any attempts to improve Naruto's life. He had done nothing to act against Naruto's ostracizing by the village at large, and through his inaction proved himself just as guilty of their sins against the boy. Yet Naruto had somehow endured the pain from those trespasses and kept fighting to change the way he was seen by the village. And the Kyuubi's rants about human nature failed to provide Inoichi with an explanation for what drove Naruto to suicide. I was witness to the atrocities you committed during your one night of freedom, and while I did not happen to witness the greatest atrocity of them all, I am still aware of the burden Yondaime placed on Naruto that night, right after he was born, Inoichi said carefully. And I am fully aware of how my complicity has contributed to the strife Naruto faced during each and every one of his waking moments. But while I do not know Naruto personally, which is something I now deeply regret, I know that he would not just give up on living unless someone or something pushed him to his breaking point. So I will repeat my question as many times as it takes for you to answer truthfully. What the hell did you do to Naruto? For a few seconds, the mindscape went completely quiet. The Kyuubi stared curiously at Inoichi, contemplating whether it would be easier to rid itself of the Yamanaka's unwanted presence by continuing to acquiesce to his demands. But just dwelling on the thought made the creature lash out in malice. It gripped the bars that kept it separated from the human presences in its domain and let loose a great roar which carried away some of the rust on the walls and caused the water to retreat. Pointless, meaningless confessions, it declared, choosing yet again to ignore the Yamanaka's demands. Even now, you would leave the kid to fend for himself. Should I satisfy your demands and tell you the reason he is so desperate to kill himself? Once you have had your way and sent him back to that attic that is a sorry excuse for a home, the first moment he finds himself without supervision he will seek out another means of ending his life. And while you only have contempt for my opinions, you would be better served by putting the kid out of his misery yourself. Killing him now will be the first and only time your village ever showed him mercy. Inoichi gritted his teeth. He didn't expect an entity like the Kyuubi to cooperate, but he was running out of options and Naruto was running out of time. The deterioration of Naruto's mindscape was truly alarming and Inoichi knew that if a massive, collective effort by Konoha's elite was not made to reverse it soon, Naruto's mind would be lost. So he did the only thing he felt he could do. And it only worked because the sheer rage he felt from the Kyuubi's constant accusations took it by surprise. Shinrin no Jutsu, Inoichi shouted after forming a non-standard seal with his hands. The Kyuubi, despite its much stronger will, was caught in the jutsu and rendered immobile for a few seconds, which was just enough time for Inoichi to force it to perform a single action. Inoichi used those few seconds to bring the monster fox crashing down onto the floor, leaving it stunned by its temporary loss of control. If Naruto dies, I swear I'll make sure you are sealed away in a place where you will never see the light of day again. You'll be buried so deep that your existence will be lost to the pages of history. The current generation will only know of you as a bedtime story told to frighten them into good behavior. Future generations will never again be burdened with the knowledge of your existence. The Kyuubi roared louder than it could care to remember roaring over the past 900 years plus of its existence. Humans had always tried to subdue it, deny it what it longed for most, and now this Yamanaka, this so-called shinobi who was an even greater mockery of its creator than most, dared to make his own attempt, and for what? The well-being of a boy whose existence did not matter to the rest of his kind. You don't have the ability to act on those threats, the Kyuubi howled as it locked eyes with Inoichi, still in disbelief that he had managed to land a blow on it. You can throw out as many words as your lungs and vocal cords permit, but they are meaningless on their own. All beings are defined not by their words, but by their actions. So if I am to consider cooperating with you, tell me this. What will you do should the kid, by some miracle, actually find the will to continue living? Do not say what you intend to do or what you plan to do, only what you will do. Inoichi was stunned by the monster fox's latest speech. True to form, it still lacked compassion, but its words struck a deep chord nonetheless. As a jonin, he remained somewhat limited in what actions he was authorized to take. But even without that limitation, was there really anything he could do to make Naruto regain the will to live? Anything that would also convince the fox that he would keep his word? It is as you said, I could waste all the words in our language expressing my intentions or laying out my plans, but none of it would matter. The most I could do on my own is attempt to stop the deterioration of Naruto's mind from progressing any further, Inoichi admitted, bowing his head. As he spoke, he could barely make out a smirk forming on the Kyuubi's snout. But while it may be beyond my ability to help Naruto start the healing process, I know there is one person in this village who has that ability, he declared, lifting his head to stare down the Kyuubi in a show of defiance. Someone who can become his pillar of strength. Naruto will live, regardless of whether or not you choose to help him. The Kyuubi's smirk vanished as Inoichi's words sunk in. This nonsensical drivel was just about what it had expected to hear, and yet it could sense that something had changed. For once, it had come across a human who was actually sincere. That this sincerity would come from one of the Mind Walkers, one who was guilty of the worst perversion of its creator's forgotten teachings, made it even more unthinkable. So, you do have some backbone, which is more than I can say for most of your kind, it grunted. Because of that, I will yield to you this one time. But after I show you what happened to the kid, you will wish you had not dared to trespass in his mind. Now come here. The fox stuck one of its hands out through the bars. Inoichi only obeyed its demand to walk towards it because he was able to recognize its submission. Once Inoichi was close enough, the fox tapped his forehead with the nail of its index finger, and in the next moment, Inoichi's mind was flooded with Naruto's memories of the past 12 hours, from the moment he woke up to the moment he lost consciousness. And Inoichi didn't just see what Naruto saw, he felt the same emotions Naruto felt in those memories. Inoichi felt Naruto's pain, and it was so pervasive and so overwhelming he could not find the words to adequately describe it. He felt Naruto's despair when Hinata was forcibly separated from him by her bodyguard. He felt Naruto shatter when Sakura delivered her rant and told him that no one would care if he disappeared. He was drowning in Naruto's sorrow as the boy contemplated his imminent death and tried to think of someone important enough for him to be with as his world ended. And when he left this mindscape, his blood would still run cold from the chill of that death as Naruto's Hite-8 fell, signaling his abandonment of hope and his surrender to the abyss. When the stream of memories ended, Inoichi found himself being expelled from Naruto's mindscape with a final warning from the Kyuubi. You would do well to never enter the kid's mind again for as long as he still lives. Inoichi took several deep breaths as he opened his eyes and found himself back in the hospital room, which was a lot more crowded than it had been when he arrived. In addition to Hiruzen and a pair of medic nin, the Yamanaka clan had found himself in the presence of Hitaki Kakashi, Yuhi Kurenai, and the remaining probationary genin who had been assigned to them for testing. Haruno Sakura, Uchiha Sasuke, Inazuka Kiba and his ninkin Akamaru, and Aburame Shino, all of whom were dressed in various assortments of sleepwear, and all of whom were showing different expressions of either annoyance or legitimate concern. What did you find in there, Inoichi-san? Hiruzen asked. It was with great apprehension that Inoichi turned to face the Hokage and answered, "It's worse than I thought, Hokage-sama." A lot worse? Yuhi Kurenai, Genjutsu specialist, was officially the third Jonin holding herself back from stepping out of line and making demands of Sarutobi Hiruzen once she saw who was being treated inside this hospital room below the surface of Konoha. The vagueness of the message delivered to her in her bedroom by an Anbu had left her confused at first, but when she saw who else had gathered at her destination she knew that something had gone horribly wrong. Even without her reputation, Kurenai tended to stand out in a crowd. Her height was slightly above average for a kunoichi, and she had untamed black hair along with distinctive red eyes. She normally preferred to wear a red mesh armor blouse and sarashi instead of the standard Konohagakure shinobi uniform, only donning the latter for specific meetings as it was uncomfortable for her to wear the accompanying flak jacket. Due to the late hour she had been summoned and the urgency of the summoning, however, right now she only had on a white bathrobe worn over a red chemise. It was not the first time an Anbu messenger had shown up at an awkward hour. Kurenai remembered one particular incident when she had been summoned to the Hokage's office while she was in the shower, and had needed to use a henge no jutsu to preserve her modesty. During her 18 years as a kunoichi, Kurenai built her reputation by focusing her training in less commonly employed ninja arts, specifically genjutsu, in which she'd immediately shown herself to possess a natural talent that rivaled the Uchiha clan's prowess in the art prior to their downfall, and fuinjutsu. While she had only recently been promoted to Jonin rank, her skills in her primary areas of expertise earned her recognition as one of Konoha's elite ninja. But right now, she felt like none of her prior accomplishments mattered. She hadn't tested her students yet and already she felt that she had failed them, after seeing one of them receiving treatment for serious injuries inside this subterranean medical wing. Hokage-sama, what is going on here? Kurenai lost control of her anger and issued her demand. The demand may not have been justified, but the anger driving it had grown too strong to fully contain. The recent events preceding this incident didn't help matters any. Earlier that day, when Kurenai met with Hyuga Hiyashi to discuss the team placements, the Hyuga patriarch had more or less abandoned Hinata to her tutelage. She had yet to be properly introduced to Hinata, only catching a brief glimpse of her during that meeting, and yet Kurenai was already fiercely protective of the ex-heiress. It was a given that Hinata would be assigned to a tracking team, and after that encounter with the girl's father, Kurenai was determined to ensure that Hinata flourished under her instruction. That is exactly what I would like to know as well, Kurenai-san, Hiruzen said, far too calmly for her liking. Inoichi-san just finished examining Naruto's mind and was about to explain why this happened. But before he does, I must inform you of what happened that required your presence here at this late hour. The reason you're here is because earlier this evening, Uzumaki Naruto attempted to end his own life. Kurenai's eyes widened as she focused her sight on the bed next to Hinata. She was old enough to remember the Kyuubi attack on Konoha 12 years ago, but young enough at the time the attack happened that she had been prohibited from participating in the defense of her village. So she was fully aware that Naruto had been chosen to contain the Kyuubi by the Yondaime Hokage. But to the best of her knowledge, the treatment Naruto had received from most of the civilian population had failed to push him over the deep end, even if it was only reasonable that it happen eventually. It also didn't explain why Hinata would be unconscious in the bed next to him. I don't believe this, Kiba whispered in disbelief. From inside Kiba's gray pajama top, Akamaru gave a low whine in agreement. Kiba was one of the few students at the academy who had tolerated Naruto enough to hang out with him on occasion, and while he didn't know Naruto very well, he had never thought the knucklehead would even think about suicide. Naruto? Sakura asked slowly, showing a surprising amount of concern given her previous treatment of the blonde. She was also shocked that he would try to pull something like this. How did this happen? She gave a shaky voice to the question on the minds of the rest of her peers. Sakura, our investigations into the matter have identified two culprits behind Naruto's suicide attempt, Inoichi addressed the pink-haired girl, narrowing his eyes at her. You are one of them. Sakura's eyes widened in horror. What are you talking about? I never saw Naruto after Iruka-sensei dismissed us today. And you didn't think that was unusual? Inoichi prodded. Sakura had to bite off her instinctive denial as she quickly realized that yes, it was unusual that Naruto would not try to speak to her. The reason you didn't see Naruto was because he was using a henge no jutsu. Now Sakura's eyes had widened so much that it looked like they would pop out of their sockets if they widened any further. You mean? That's right, Inoichi confirmed with a nod. Who you thought was Sasuke was, in fact, Naruto, disguised as the object of your obsession in the hopes of breaking you of that obsession and winning your affections. And he heard everything you told him, even your claims that it wouldn't matter if he didn't exist. Sakura's legs gave out on her and she fell hard onto the floor, burying her face in her hands in a futile attempt to hide the horror she felt from the others. No, that isn't what I meant. I just wanted him to leave me alone. I didn't want him to do this. She wailed. So we know why Naruto is here. But what about Hinata? Shino asked, swiftly moving the discussion away from Sakura. Both Kurenai and Hiruzen sighed at the detachment in his voice. Under normal circumstances, it is not my place even as Hokage to reveal personal information about a Konoha nin to their comrades of equal or lower rank without their consent. But as your assigned Jonin instructor knows, Hinata has a habit of following Naruto and trying to remain unseen by others, Hiruzen explained. I am thankful she developed this habit, because had she not followed him tonight Naruto would most likely not be alive right now. Hinata tried to save Naruto, but she was badly injured by her efforts. Why did you let this happen to them? Kurenai yelled at Hiruzen, abandoning protocol. She knew she was way out of line trying to make demands of the Hokage, but Hinata was her student, damn it. She wasn't about to let any further harm befall the girl, and she was furious that the Hokage had allowed this incident to occur in the first place. Just as soon as the words slipped out of her mouth, she heard moans of pain coming from Hinata's bed. Apparently, Kurenai's anger had roused the girl from her unconscious state. All eyes in the room shifted their gaze towards Hinata as she moaned out something incoherent and tried to sit up, only to fall hard against the bed as the pain from her injuries overwhelmed her. Kurenai rushed to her bed and knelt down next to her on her left. "Take it easy, Hinata," Kurenai said in a gentle tone. "You shouldn't try to move right now." NGH. Hinata groaned as she tried to remember what happened before she blacked out. Her eyes stung from the light in the room, and it would take time for the sting to go away. She knew her right arm and leg were both broken and she could feel a pillow underneath her head, so she was most likely back at the clan's estate, but her mind was still trying to reboot and remember how she had been injured enough to end up at her current location. What happened?" she asked, her voice slurred. "You had a major accident, Hinata. You're in the hospital right now. Please don't try to move around." Hospital? But Hinata was cut off mid-stammer by a sudden flare of pain in her broken leg. After another loud moan, she carefully lifted up her head and saw that both that leg and her right arm were in casts, and her left hand was wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. How? She tried to ask softly. "Can you tell us what you remember from tonight?" Hinata gave Kurenai a weak nod. I went out to look for Naruto-kun. When I found him, he was distressed, and I knew something was wrong with him. I tried to talk to Naruto-kun, but then he..." Her voice trailed off as her head turned slightly to glance at the bed to her right. When she saw the unconscious Naruto, who very much resembled a mummy with how many bandages were wrapped around him, the memory of her fall rushed back to her. Her eyes shot open and she immediately panicked. "Naruto-kun!" Hinata cried. A fresh wave of tears clouded her vision as she tried to yank herself free of her current constraints and get to Naruto. "Calm down, Hinata. You're going to hurt yourself worse if you don't stay still." Kurenai scolded her. "I don't care," Hinata protested. "Naruto-kun is in more pain than I am. Naruto-kun needs me. You need to listen to your Jonin instructor," one of the two medic nin spoke up, moving to help Kurenai restrain Hinata while the other reached for a vial in his utility belt that contained a sedative. "No, I need to help Naruto-kun." Hinata refused to comply. She was traumatized by watching Naruto jump off the Hokage rock, and while she had been powerless to save him from getting hurt, she would not let anyone stop her from helping him now, not while she still had the strength to move. As the second medic nin came forward to put the sedative into her IV drip, she tugged on the wires holding her broken leg in place hard enough to rip them out of the ceiling, then kicked the first medic's thigh with her newly freed leg, forcing him to release her and allowing her to kick the other medic with her other leg hard enough to cause the vial to drop to the floor and shatter. "That was extremely dangerous, Hinata." Kurenai snapped at her. "All you're doing right now is showing them why they need to sedate you." "Let me go, damn it!" Hinata screamed back. "I need to be with Naruto-kun. I need to help Naruto-kun." Kurenai was at a loss for words. From the report Hiruzen gave her on Hinata prior to her meeting with Hiyashi, Kurenai was under the impression that the former heiress was meek, timid and obedient, and disliked confrontations. Kurenai also noted that her assigned teammates appeared to be completely stunned as well by Hinata's current behavior. Hinata was vehement and unyielding, disregarding her own safety and her insistence on doing whatever she thought she could do to help Naruto. She was even willing to utter curses towards the people restraining her as part of her protests against being restrained. Whatever had happened to lead to her fateful encounter and near-death experience with Naruto, Kurenai saw it had left Hinata deeply shaken. "I would strongly recommend doing as Hinata asks," Inoichi said. Kurenai instantly released her grip on Hinata and snapped around to face the head of the Yamanaka clan. "Inoichi, you can't be serious." Now it was Kurenai's turn to protest. "I don't need to enter Hinata's mindscape to know that her mental state has also deteriorated greatly. Trying to sedate her now will increase the risk of permanent damage to her mind. And before you try to argue, let me state that what I found in Naruto's mind was horrific. I don't want to imagine what I might find in Hinata's mind if I were to examine her now." Kurenai turned back towards Hinata, who had ripped out the wires holding up her right arm from the ceiling and was still struggling to get out of the grip of the first medic nin. Then she looked to the Hokage, who nodded at Inoichi, and sighed deeply. "All right," she conceded. "It's okay now, Hinata. You don't have to struggle anymore. We'll let you help Naruto." Hinata stopped struggling the moment she heard Kurenai give in, but did not get a chance to thank her instructor as she found herself carefully lifted into Kurenai's arms. The two medic nin lifted the bed and frame up and carried it around to the other side of Naruto's bed before placing it back down, positioning it so that there was no space between the two. Hinata whimpered while Kurenai walked back to the bed and gently laid her down, while the medics gathered extra pillows to stack under her broken limbs and prop them up until the wires could be reattached. Naruto-kun? Hinata whispered, tears still streaming down her cheeks as she reached towards Naruto with her left arm. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I wasn't able to protect you from this. And for now, all Kurenai could do for Hinata was the same thing everyone else in the room was doing. Fall into a respectful silence and give her time to let her feelings out. Inoichi-san, do you have any further questions? Hiruzen asked shortly after Hinata's sobbing subsided. Inoichi shook his head. Not at this time, Hokage-sama. I believe I know everything I need to for now based on what I saw in Naruto's mind. With that being said, I am requesting permission to examine the rest of the students here, for safe measure. This caused all of the conscious probationary genin in the room to turn towards him and protest. You already got what you wanted from me. Sakura yelled. Don't go messing with my head. For once, I agree with Sakura. What the hell do we have to do with this? Kiba asked angrily, backed up by a growl from Akamaru. It is simply a precaution, Inoichi explained. Naruto nearly died tonight and no one could have predicted it. It is for your safety as much as it is for our peace of mind. Che, this is a waste of time, Sasuke muttered. He folded his arms in front of his bare chest and looked away from Inoichi, and was only staying put because there were too many stronger ninja in the room to keep him from walking out. The fourth protest, from Shino, was not conveyed in words. The angry buzzing of his Kakaichu was more than enough to tell Inoichi what he thought of this. But all of their responses were expected, to a certain extent. Hinata's response was not. Don't screw with me, Hinata whispered. Everyone in the room turned their heads towards her bed, disbelief carved into their faces by what they had just heard coming from her lips. Hinata? Kurenai asked worriedly. Hinata sat up and gazed coldly at the group gathered, particularly the adults. The Hokage, the Anbu, Iruka-sensei, and two elite jonin didn't know this would happen? What a load of crap, Hinata cursed again. Everyone's eyes widened even further. This time they definitely heard Hinata swear and were shocked the girl was capable of such an act. Don't tell me you didn't know how mistreated Naruto-kun has been. Don't stand there and lie to me, don't you dare stand there while Naruto-kun is in pain and lie to me, damn it. Hinata yelled, her eyes glistening with righteous rage. The truth is you didn't care enough to stop this before it happened. Everyone was momentarily left in stunned silence at her outburst, even Hiruzen, who was hit the hardest by her words. I'm going to assume this is your concussion speaking. Kurenai was the first to recover and attempt to reprimand Hinata. Hinata narrowed her eyes at Kurenai as she spat out her reply. I am in complete control of my feelings right now, Kurenai-sensei. And right now, my feelings are telling me that this entire situation should have been avoided, and would have been avoided if people had tried harder to understand Naruto's suffering. Hinata, you are on very thin ice right now. I would choose your next words very carefully if I were you, Kurenai warned her charge. Or what? What punishment could you possibly give me that would be worse than the hell I have already suffered through tonight? Before Kurenai could give her the obvious answer, Sakura burst into mocking laughter at Hinata's fury and pointed an accusing finger at her. Don't try to act all high and mighty here, Hyuga-hime. Sakura yelled at the bedridden ex-heiress. You didn't do anything until the last possible second. All you did the whole time was follow Naruto around like a stalker. You're just as guilty as the rest of us. Kurenai was about to step in again and yell at them to stop, but Hiruzen held up his hand, indicating he wanted to see how Hinata would respond. Hinata's face was downcast as she sounded like she was choking back sobs when she finally answered. You're right, Haruno-san. I am just as guilty as you. No, my guilt is greater than yours. I knew that I should have helped Naruto-kun. But I didn't. I let my fear and cowardice control me. Maybe if I had tried to be Naruto's friend, none of this would have ever happened. So yes, it is my fault he is like this. Sakura had a huge smirk on her face, but it vanished as Hinata raised her head and activated her Byakugan, fighting off the pain her dojutsu activation caused her as she stared down Sakura and engulfed her in a murderous aura. But I have decided that from now on, I won't let my fear control me. I will be there for Naruto-kun in any way I can to make up for the wrongs I did to him. HMPH. If you want him so bad, just take him onto your team. I don't want to be grouped with him, Sakura sneered. Gladly. I should have been the one to be on his team anyway, Hinata said coldly. But since that is not the case, I am going to lay down some ground rules, Haruno-san, she continued before Sakura could yell out anything else. You will not be anywhere near Naruto-kun when he is off duty. Sakura couldn't believe what was happening. Was Hinata, the shy timid girl of their class, threatening her? Hinata's next words, coming out in a hiss, only strengthened her disbelief. And if you ever tell Naruto-kun he is worthless again, I will end you. Enough. Hiruzen shouted over the bickering of the two barely pubescent probationary genin. Sakura would have been better left to her remorse than provoked by Hinata into launching a verbal attack on her injured comrade. And Hinata's anger towards every other conscious person in this room may have been justified, but she was also in need of a severe attitude adjustment. Sakura, given your overall behavior for this entire day, both before and after you were brought here, your future as a ninja of this village is in jeopardy. I will decide your fate tomorrow. Sakura clenched her fists and looked down to the floor. I understand, Hokage-sama, she gritted out, not making eye contact with Hiruzen. The shaking in her voice was not entirely due to the anger Hinata had provoked from her. Some of it was still from her prior realization of the role she had played in this incident, and her being horrified by her actions was something Hiruzen only saw as a good thing. Hiruzen then turned to address the injured Hyuga girl in an even harsher tone than he had used on Sakura. As for you, Hinata, while I understand your anger, you need to remember that I am the Hokage and I will not tolerate the disrespect you have shown to myself, your instructor, and your comrades. Considering the circumstances, I shall overlook your misconduct this time, but if it happens again there will be unpleasant consequences. Do I make myself clear? Hinata's gaze turned coldly on the Hokage, clearly still angry at him. However, she bowed her head, deactivated her dojutsu and answered, crystal clear, Hokage-sama, in a voice that still felt every bit as cold as her gaze. Hiruzen knew she only said it because she was forced to, but it was better than nothing. Inoichi-san, take the students out of here and scan their minds, and then report to me once you are finished. The Anbu will escort them back to their homes. Kurenai-san and Kakashi-san, I would speak to you outside. Inoichi nodded. There is an empty room across the hall. We need to let Hinata and Naruto rest now, so if the four of you would follow me, he instructed the other probationary genin. As they vacated the hospital room, Hiruzen was the last one to take his leave. He turned his head back one last time and saw Hinata using Naruto's chest as a pillow, her tears once more flowing freely, and he could just make out her soft whispers of apology to the unconscious blonde. He sighed as he shut off the light and closed the door. Hinata had shown him two very important things this evening. The first was that her behavior, while he could not condone it, demonstrated a willingness to go against anyone who would try to prevent her from protecting Naruto. That hidden strength was something she would surely need in the days to come. And the second, and perhaps the more important, was that from the moment she had been placed next to Naruto, Hinata had gripped the boy's hand tightly and never let go. Outside, Hiruzen wasted no time in lighting up his pipe while the two elite jonin who were assigned to test the students they met in the hospital stood behind him in silence. The Hokage felt their unrest and irritation brought on by this incident, and he knew they were not satisfied with the answers they had received in the hospital's basement. Which reminds me, Kakashi broke the uncomfortable silence. Why are Naruto and Hinata in the basement of the hospital? They should be in the standard emergency care wing, Kurenai agreed. In separate rooms. Why are they in the same room? Hiruzen exhaled and turned to face the two jonin. I should think the answer to that is obvious. As both of you are no doubt aware, there is no shortage of people in this village who would like to finish what Naruto himself started and kill him while he is weakened. Seeing that Naruto was allowed to hurt himself in the first place, I do not know who I can trust with his safety, so it is best that as few people as possible know he was hospitalized. Thus I had him placed in the basement and only informed a handful of medical personnel of his condition. As for why I had Hinata placed in the same room, you saw her reaction when she saw Naruto's condition. If she had awakened in her state of mind and couldn't find Naruto, I have no doubt she would have caused herself further harm trying to find him. Are you sure it's a good idea to let that kid be a genin? Kakashi asked no sooner than when Hiruzen had finished answering the previous question. You seem to have the wrong idea, Kakashi-san. Naruto's mind is in a dark place right now. After all he went through to even achieve the status of probationary genin, it would be a terrible idea to send him back to the academy. With you watching him, I won't have to be as concerned for his safety. So my job is to babysit him? You are to train him so he doesn't need to be babysat, Kakashi, Hiruzen replied, slightly annoyed with the copy ninja's attempts to weasel out of training Naruto. Why not allow Naruto to be put on my team? Kurenai asked. Hinata would certainly welcome the transfer. And I would be more than happy to help her watch over Naruto. Hiruzen shook his head. Out of the question for a number of reasons. The first being that you have already been assigned a full team, Kurenai-san. I can handle 4 students, Hokage-sama. And if you'll pardon my bluntness, I don't believe Kakashi-san can take care of Naruto. Kakashi looked offended by Kurenai's implications. My hesitation to train Naruto has nothing to do with my past. He is my teacher's son, after all. It should be my responsibility to train him when he is ready, but after what happened tonight, I do not believe he is anywhere near ready. His readiness is up to me to decide, Kakashi, Hiruzen cut in. And Kurenai, Kakashi's personal history is not the problem here. I was planning to give Hinata a field promotion that would make her an official genin regardless of the results of your test for Team 8, and assign her the long-term mission of living with Naruto, effective immediately after they are released from the hospital. The 2 Jonin stared at the Hokage for a while before yelling in unison, what? It will help give the 2 time to mend their wounds together, both physical and emotional, the Hokage explained. They will not be able to participate in team activities for at least a month due to their injuries. But why would you have them live together? Kakashi asked. Hokage-sama, if it's truly necessary to have someone move in with Naruto, your best bet is Iruka. Hiruzen took another puff of his pipe before answering, I will take that into consideration, Kakashi-san. But let me explain why I am choosing Hinata for this mission. Naruto and Hinata are both broken in many of the same ways. Naruto craves acknowledgement from the village while Hinata longs for it from her family. I had hoped they would have become friends long before now, but apparently Hinata has suffered from her clan's verbal abuse for so long that she was never able to build up enough self-confidence to approach Naruto until this afternoon, and when she did, her bodyguard decided to step in and take her away. There is a high likelihood that Naruto will attempt to inflict harm on himself once again if he is left alone, and I believe Hinata can prevent that from happening. Pardon me for interrupting this discussion, but you're all missing the most important piece of the puzzle, Inoichi said. The others turned their heads to see him walking towards them from the entrance to the stairs, clearly showing fatigue from having used his mental ninjutsu multiple times in succession. Finished already, Inoichi-san? Hiruzen asked. Yes, Hokage-sama. It didn't take long to form my conclusions on the students' minds, but I will speak about that later. And the students have been sent back to their homes? Was the follow-up question? Inoichi nodded in reply. What are we missing, exactly? Kurenai asked. Inoichi sighed and rubbed his temples, clearly showing how tired he was after everything he had seen that night. We are missing the fact that Hinata doesn't want to settle for just being Naruto's friend. What are you saying, Inoichi-san? She nearly died to save Naruto. Kurenai yelled. And none of you find that even the least bit odd? There is no shortage of tales about 2 comrades who are willing to sacrifice themselves for one another, but there is no possible way Hinata and Naruto could have formed that kind of bond yet, having only just been made genin. Go on, Kakashi said. I couldn't wrap my mind around what could make that girl do something so rash for a boy she wasn't even friends with. So when I was sure she was asleep, I went back into that room and examined her mind, and found something that complicates things even further. Hinata is in love with Naruto, Hiruzen observed. Are you sure? Kurenai asked and Inoichi nodded. She probably doesn't know it herself yet, but it's only a matter of time before she figures it out. Kurenai turned to Hiruzen after Inoichi finished and asked, do you still think it's a good idea to leave the 2 of them alone together now? Won't this hurt Naruto more? Yes, it could indeed, Hiruzen said. If Hinata realizes she loves Naruto and tells him too soon, it could shatter him beyond repair. Naruto doesn't know what love is, the poor boy has never had anyone to show him. Hinata's feelings for him could cause him great turmoil once they are revealed simply because he won't know how to respond. When he finished, Hiruzen turned to Inoichi and instructed him to report in the morning about his other findings. Then he turned towards the Hokage mansion. "Wait!" Kurenai yelled. Hiruzen stopped and turned around, and raised a single eyebrow at her. "Is there something more you wish to say before I retire to my office, Kurenai-san? Why the hell would you make Hinata and Naruto live together knowing it could bring harm to not just one but both of them?" she demanded. Hiruzen took one last puff of his pipe and looked upwards to the starry sky before answering, "Because right now, Hinata's love is the only reason Naruto is still alive," and then walking away. Hinata couldn't tell how much time had passed after she cried herself to sleep last night, or at least, she hoped it was last night, that the nightmare she'd lived through was over now. The events of that night were forever carved into the recesses of her mind, and not gently either. The memories were like scars. Naruto trying to end his own life, her trying to stop him at the last possible moment, and finally the way he held her close as they fell. Just the thought of it made Hinata want to cry. When faced with his own death, Naruto had put another person's life above his own. Hers, to be more specific. Using her left arm, she pushed herself up to a sitting position on the bed and realized something was wrong. Her right arm was now in a sling, and her bed had been moved back to its original position, leaving her across the room from Naruto, whose head was turned away from her. "Naruto-kun?" Hinata asked slowly. Naruto didn't turn his head or make any indication that he had heard her. Hinata was about to call to him again when he finally spoke. "I asked them to move you when I woke up, you know." Hinata's face was downcast as she replied, "I'm sorry. I made you feel uncomfortable, didn't I?" "That wasn't why," Naruto said slowly. Hinata's head shot up at his reply. If Naruto had not been uncomfortable with next to him, then why? "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, afraid of the prospect Naruto might be angry with her for interfering with his attempted suicide. "Hinata, I don't know what ideas you got in your head about me, but they're wrong. I'm not who you think I am. Naruto-kun, Hinata couldn't find the words to say what needed to be said. She knew there were so many things that she needed to say. That she knew what it was like to feel alone, that she too craved for acknowledgement. But wouldn't it be selfish of her to demand his acknowledgement? But there was also something else, something that was more important than anything, but she couldn't figure out what it was she felt she needed to say. Before she could form the words to try, Naruto turned his head to face her and Hinata gasped at the sight. "Tell me, Hinata, what do you see?" he asked. Hinata did not want to answer that. It was like one of her nightmares had escaped the confines of her mindscape and manifested in the real world. Naruto's skin, or what little she could see of it, was ghostly pale, as if his body had suddenly become cold-blooded. The bandages wrapped around his face, head and neck didn't help as they only made him look even more lifeless. But what was by far the worst part was his eyes. The beautiful blue eyes that had once filled Hinata with hope were cold and devoid of color. She couldn't make out his pupils and wasn't sure if they were even there. Staring into his eyes was like staring into an abyss. Naruto broke a small, sad smile at her reaction that just made his face more depressing. "I thought you'd react like that. Tell me, Hinata, does this look like the face of someone who can become the Hokage?" Hinata was fighting back tears as she tried to bring Naruto back from the dark caves his mind was in. "Listen to me, Naruto-kun. I know it's hard for you, especially right now, but I can still help you. Once we are released from the hospital, what will you do?" Naruto cut her off. He wasn't angry with her, he just didn't believe she could give him a satisfactory answer. "What could you do, Hinata?" Hinata sniffled a little as she tried to come up with an answer. Even with the little influence she had with her clan, it would never be enough to make the rest of the village stop mistreating Naruto or win him any support. There was only one thing she could do for him. I would be your friend, if you were willing." Naruto's eyes widened for a moment before narrowing at her offer. "It's too late for that, Hinata." Hinata's response was an immediate wail. Why is it too late? Why can't I be your friend? I know I never tried before when I should have, and I don't deserve to be your friend because of that, but I still want to try now." Naruto sighed. "That's not it, Hinata. I'd love to be your friend, but I can't. You're wrong again. I'm the one who doesn't deserve it." "How can you say that?" Hinata asked as her tears started to flow again. "Look around you, Hinata. You're here in this hospital because of me. You got hurt because of me. Everyone and everything I come close to gets hurt. Don't you get it? I'm broken and I'm tired of living, I have nothing to offer you except misery. That's why I wanted to die, Hinata. What good am I to anyone if I'm broken? Then he looked to her and gave her a sorrowful smile before adding, how can I become Hokage when I let someone like you get hurt? How can I become Hokage if I can't even save myself? Hinata couldn't respond. What was she supposed to say to Naruto? How could she fix what he claimed was broken? Even if it was possible to fix him, would he ever go back to being the person he was before? It was clear to her now that it wasn't just Naruto's heart and mind that were broken. His very soul had been shattered, its glass fragments ground back into sand. His will of fire was completely extinguished. Naruto did not value his own life, so how could he believe that anyone else would value him? Naruto-kun, please. Hinata pleaded, please let me help you. Naruto turned his head away from her and remained silent for a few minutes before answering, there's nothing left of me to help, Hinata. I appreciate you trying, but it's best if you don't talk to me anymore. And that was the end of the conversation as Naruto pulled the blinds around his bed, cutting off any communication to Hinata as she cried for him to come back to her. Back in his office, Hiruzen was facing an entirely different set of problems from the two broken children in the hospital. The man had not slept at all last night and was more than just physically tired. He had already consumed several cups of coffee, but the truth of the matter was, he was too old for this type of work. But there was nothing he could do. Ever since his successor and Naruto's father, the late Namikaze Minato, laid down his life for the village, Hiruzen had been obligated to reclaim the mantle of Hokage. At least until the time was right to step down once more. But each time he thought he found a worthy successor, there were no small number of issues that came up to stop him from passing on the hat and all the burdens that came with it. Hiruzen sighed as he sat down, contemplating if it would be prudent for him to go home. A knock on the door answered his question for him. Enter, he said wearily. The door opened to reveal Inoichi, arriving ahead of schedule to deliver his report on the mental states of teams 7 and 8. Inoichi took one look at Hiruzen and frowned. I see you didn't get any sleep last night, Hokage-sama. How could I? Hiruzen asked, his voice bitter. Last night's incident was a serious breach in village security. I loathe to admit that Hinata's anger towards me last night was justified, but she is extending the blame to too many others when it should be placed on my shoulders alone. I should never have had the Anbu stop their surveillance of Naruto after he entered the academy. I was too careless. The fault isn't yours alone, sir. There are many others who should have done more to stop this from happening, myself included. Besides, there are more pressing matters to focus on right now than assigning blame. But before I can begin to address those matters, I have a message to deliver to you from Hiyashi-san, Inoichi said, handing the old man a sealed scroll. And what were you doing near the Hyuga estate this morning? Hiruzen asked. Inoichi's response showed no small annoyance with the inferred accusation. With all due respect, sir, I am the last person you should be suspicious of considering the pains I'm going through for you at the cost of neglecting my other duties. So I would appreciate some courtesy. Hiruzen let out another sigh as he took the scroll. Forgive me, Inoichi-san. This whole situation has been very taxing. I understand, sir. Hiruzen nodded and then opened the scroll and read the contents. If you must know though, I met a messenger from Hiyashi-san on my way here. When he told me the message was for you, I offered to take it as I was heading this way anyway. I doubt you would want any more than the absolute minimum number of visitors this morning. Hiruzen listened as he rolled the scroll back up and set it aside. It appears that Hinata's bodyguard Ko, who was instrumental in Naruto's suicide attempt, has been relieved of his duties. Not only that, Hiyashi took it upon himself to brand Ko with the Kago no Tori no Juin. Inoichi's eyes widened in horror. Isn't that punishment excessive, sir? Hiruzen stood up and walked around the desk to face Inoichi clearly in the eyes. Actually, Hiyashi-san was being merciful. How is using a Juinjutsu on one of his own clansmen a mercy? Inoichi-san, need I remind you of the law I put in place after Naruto's birth? Inoichi froze up as the truth of the situation started to dawn on him. Speaking of the burden Naruto carries without my express permission is not the only capital offense defined by that law. Any action, be it directly or indirectly, that would bring harm to Uzumaki Naruto is punishable by death. So when I say Hiyashi-san showed mercy by branding Ko with the cursed seal, I mean he saved Ko from what I would have, and still feel I should do, Hiruzen said in a deadly serious tone. Inoichi did not frighten easily, but Hiruzen was not someone whose bad side he wanted to be on. There was a reason why he was still the Hokage long after the death of his successor. I understand, sir. On a side note, I expect Hiyashi-san would be equal parts horrified and impressed by his daughter's behavior last night once he is informed. There are very few in this village who are brave enough to tell off their Hokage. Inoichi wisely refrained from making any comment. Seeing his silence, Hiruzen nodded and leaned against his chair. Well, then, let's hear what you came here for. I would like to at least attempt to get some rest before the next crisis arrives at this office. Inoichi nodded and folded his arms in front of him. 2 of the 6 probationary genin were normal, Hokage-sama. I could not find any problems with Kiba or Shino. I cannot say the same for any of the others, however. I suppose I should start with Hinata, since she seemed to be the least damaged of the 4. As you probably know, Hyuga Hinata is a victim of abuse and neglect, though I could not find a single memory which would indicate that she was ever physically abused. The verbal abuse she received from her clan started roughly 3 years ago, after she lost a spar against her younger sister to determine whether or not she would keep her title as the heiress to the clan. However, while Hinata has, to the best of my knowledge, never been struck outside of a spar, there was one spar against her cousin Neji that took place before she was stripped of the heiress position when he tried to kill her. Knowing all of this, it is little wonder she has such low self-esteem. Hinata feels like she is every bit the failure the rest of the Hyuga clan see her as. I am already aware of most of this, Inoichi-san. It is exactly why I had planned to issue Hinata a field promotion and assign her to live with Naruto, in order to get her out of the Hyuga estate and allow her time to heal her own wounds even as she would help Naruto heal his. Now continue your report. Very well, sir. All 3 of the probationary genin assigned to this year's Team 7 have severe issues. Naruto's, you have already seen some of, but not all. I believe we all underestimated just how deeply he was affected by the neglect he suffered ever since he was released from the care of the village elders and Anbu. Every night, Naruto suffered in silence, knowing no one would help him, but still hoping that someone would come along anyway to take him in and end his all-consuming loneliness. Naruto often asked himself in the solitude of his bed why he doesn't have a mother and father like most children. So when Sakura suggested to him yesterday that his parents chose to abandon him, she inadvertently found his breaking point and struck it with maximum force, Hiruzen observed. After what we witnessed last night, I cannot disagree with that assessment. But what state, exactly, was Naruto's mind in when you examined it? Inoichi folded his arms and lowered his head, trying to decide how best to word his answer. I do not feel that I can provide an adequate description for what I felt and witnessed in there, sir. Naruto's mindscape was visibly damaged by the events that transpired yesterday afternoon. He was trying to repress as many of his negative emotions as possible, but after the incidents with Ko and Sakura, those emotions started flooding his mind. After being subjected to some of those emotions, it was of little wonder to me that Naruto arrived at the worst possible scenario in such a short amount of time. The Hokage grimaced at Inoichi's very inadequate and disturbing report. Will Naruto recover? He asked, unable to suppress the slight quivering in his voice. At this moment in time, I cannot provide a definitive answer to that question. Naruto has lost the desire for acknowledgement. He only wishes to be left alone to his misery. That will not be allowed. Hiruzen's tone was resolute. In addition to assigning Hinata to live with Naruto as her first official mission, I will be reactivating the Anbu surveillance on him to ensure there are no further attempts made on his life, by himself or anyone else. I am also looking into assigning more caretakers to Naruto. The Hokage paused momentarily and saw Inoichi frowning, observing that the Yamanaka clan head did not feel they were doing enough to resolve this situation. What else do you have to say on Naruto's condition, Inoichi-san? We cannot afford any more mishaps. Inoichi gulped. There are 2 other things that disturbed me when I examined Naruto's mind. The first, of course, being the Kyuubi. You saw the Kyuubi? Hiruzen interrupted, nearly screaming his question. I didn't just see the monster fox, Hokage-sama. It interrogated me, and vice versa. The interaction I had with it is deeply disturbing. The Kyuubi claimed to know the secrets of the Hake no Fuin that keeps it imprisoned inside Naruto, and worse, it claimed that because of Naruto's incident last night, the seal has weakened. Did it play any part in Naruto's suicide attempt? Inoichi shook his head. The fox claimed to be innocent of that incident. Given what we know, I'm inclined to believe it spoke the truth this time. In that case, I have no choice but to contact Jiraiya and recall him to Konoha so he can examine the seal and determine the full extent of the damage. But you mentioned there was one other thing that bothered you? Inoichi nodded. When I found Naruto, there were several dark silhouettes surrounding him. But after he begged me to kill him, another silhouette appeared, one of pure light, and its behavior was different. The other silhouettes were manifestations of villagers who have mistreated Naruto, but this one seemed to want to protect him. Due to the absence of friends in Naruto's life, this bright silhouette must be a recent construct. I doubt Naruto is aware of what it represents. Hiruzen groaned. The plot continues to thicken. If what you saw was just a reflection of Naruto's memories, then there is little that I can personally do for him. You will need to begin regular therapy sessions with Naruto as soon as possible to monitor the situation. It will be done. Excellent. Now what of his teammates? Right. As I said earlier, all 3 probationary genin who were assigned to Team 7 have severe issues. Naruto's are among the worst I have ever seen, but even after what I saw in his mind, I was still troubled by what I found when I examined Sakura. Hiruzen raised an eyebrow. Go on. Haruno Sakura developed a habit of projecting certain emotions inward rather than outward, which has over time caused her mind to construct a second personality. While this, inner Sakura, does not appear to be able to control Sakura directly, I feel it holds a strong enough influence over her to impair her judgment. Knowing this, I cannot in good conscience condone allowing her to still become a ninja. Hold on a moment, Inoichi-san. Let's not jump to conclusions just yet. While what you have just told me is an additional cause for concern, I would hear the rest of your findings before making any further judgments. Hiruzen bid him. Inoichi's face turned dark as the Hokage finished speaking, as though he was burdened by a terrible secret. As troubling as it was when I discovered Sakura's split personality, I'm afraid that what was in Sasuke's mind could be even worse than what I found in Naruto's. He shuddered before continuing, Hokage-sama, there is something wrong with that boy. His mind is singularly focused on thoughts of revenge. In what aspect is that different than what you saw inside Naruto's mind? Hiruzen asked. Naruto's mind was consumed by despair, devoid of hope and life. Despite everything that has been done to him, Naruto only feels sadness, and it's almost as if he is incapable of hating those who have rightly earned his hatred. And while that is horrific in and of itself, it is fundamentally different than what I saw in Sasuke, Inoichi explained. Both Naruto and Sasuke blame themselves for what happened to break them. However, the key difference is that Sasuke also extends the blame for the massacre of the Uchiha clan to us. His upbringing coupled with the trauma instilled and reinforced in him a strong inferiority complex. He simply believes he is not good enough. But since that night, Sasuke has also come to believe this village failed him and allowed his clan to be wiped out. He believes our shinobi have grown complacent. And worse than his lost faith in us is the burning hatred he has held for his brother ever since he saw him kill their mother and father with his own eyes. The last loyal Uchiha's only loyalty is to his dead clan, and he will stop at nothing to avenge them. When Inoichi finished explaining, Hiruzen remained silent, thinking and contemplating how he should react. The words of Uchiha Itachi echoed in his mind as he went back to that terrible night 4.5 years ago. You must promise me that no matter what, you will protect Sasuke from Danzo, the elders, and anyone else who would use him for their own sinister ends. When one makes the mistake of thinking things cannot become any more complicated, something like this happens, he muttered. But Hiruzen would fulfill his promise to Itachi to protect Sasuke, even if that meant extending it to protect Sasuke from himself. He sighed again and walked back behind his desk to sit down. Then he reached into the bottom drawer on his desk for the documents he had hoped he would never use. Inoichi saw what Hiruzen was doing, quickly realized his intentions, and decided to inquire about them. Hokage-sama, are you sure that's a wise decision? The news about Sasuke is cause for concern, but I will inform Kakashi-san of these changes myself. Truth be told, it's better this way. Naruto will need all the help he can get if he is to find his will to live again. Hopefully this will help him, and I hope it will also help Sasuke and Sakura come to realize their own shortcomings. Hiruzen signed the documents and handed them to Inoichi. I'm sorry to ask this of you, my friend, but could you deliver these for me? I must go and speak with Kakashi-san. Inoichi nodded. Of course, sir, but what about you? He asked, referring to the bags under the Hokage's eyes. Hiruzen chuckled. I guess I'll need more caffeine in my system. But it is not the first time this job has caused me to suffer from sleep deprivation, he said as he walked out the door.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.